Hello there. The time is almost upon us. Velma 2, Velma Harder is right around the corner. Many sadistic people are asking me if I intend to cover it. Less relevant people are preparing to grandstand about the evils of hate watching as though convincing HBO to waste its money on this stuff is a bad thing. Well, my editor is currently doing magical things with 2 very long scripts for Dune and for Rebel Moon. I currently have a cold, which is why I sound like death in this part of the video. Don't worry, I'll sound much better in a couple of seconds' time. But it's freed me up to do silly masochistic things like, covering Velma. So the answer is probably. That will of course mean more of me. Maybe even me every week, as opposed to me every month. Your wives and boyfriends are quivering with anticipation, I'm sure. In preparation for the television event of the century, or at the very least of next week, I present to you this supercut, the entirety of the Velma Season 1 review right here in one place. If you're new to the channel, I hope you enjoy it. If you've seen it all before, relive it in all its splendor. Or go away and do something productive with your life because really, you've only got so many years left. What the fuck are you doing here? Yes, I know it is a re-release, but video game companies do it all the time, right? And unlike video game re-releases, I'm still just as sexy as I was the first time. Toodaloo.
And he's not here. That was the last time Titanic ever saw. I don't think I've ever tried so hard to be gay and made such a dismal mess.
This is my story, told my way. Kitties!
Hey Siri, what's a self-insert character?
As the name implies, a self-insert fic is one where the author has made a simulacrum of themselves, commonly called an avatar, in the story's world as a key character, usually the protagonist, but any other role that's vital to the story qualifies.
I want to start off by praising Velma. No, really, I do. Stop laughing, I'm being serious. One of the biggest crimes in modern entertainment is the letdown. Shows that start off brilliantly, or even that just start off well. Shows which are intriguing, which are even beguiling. Shows which are brilliantly written, clever, which cause you to invest hours of your hard-won time in them, which invite you to fall in love with the characters they depict and the world they create, only then to completely botch the landing. Game of Thrones is probably the summum malum of this genre of letdown, though Battlestar Galactica also deserves a look in. It's especially tragic precisely because it was once so good. You devoted so much of your life to it. You poured your metaphorical savings into it, only for the payoff to be so much worse than nothing. So I want to begin by praising Velma, which never let us labor under any such delusions. Velma tells you exactly what it is from its very first second, and what it is complete, unadulterated shite. In fact, the show seems very keen that we all understand this about it as quickly as possible, and it really wants to make sure that we all understand this about it. After all, if you're not paying attention, there's always a chance you'll miss any single giveaway. So, within its first 90 seconds, I'm not exaggerating, here's the proof, the show decides to hit us with cringe after cringe after cringe, an opening monologue complaining about how men get better origin stories than women.
Normally, origin stories are about tall, handsome guys struggling with the burden of being handed even more power. And if they are about girls, it's usually like, hey, what made this hot chick go crazy?
The eponymous Velma telling us that her origin story
It starts with a murder, bitch.
The words try and hard come most readily to mind, cutting then to a sub-Family Guy scene of 2 cartoon cockroaches having sex for no conceivable reason, and then to a shower scene, allowing the show to lapse into lazy meta-commentary about pilots having more sex and nakedness than the rest of the season that follows. Which, by the way, goes on, and on, and on, the showering cartoon ladies telling us that sex sells and the show needs a hook, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. It morphs into a brief shower fight between Daphne and Velma, Velma here looking like the notoriously, cognitively challenged British MP Diane Abbott.
Why is it right to wear a Maoist t-shirt, but obviously wrong, as it is, to wear a Hitler t-shirt?
I suppose some people will judge that on balance, Mao did more good than harm. We can't say that about the Nazis.
Credit earned, though, because although the show's humour so far has been on a par with a Family Guy knockoff, at least it hasn't gone the whole way and aped the art style, which is how you can tell that it hasn't been made by Netflix. The writing across the first episode would embarrass a very early model of one of those chatbot AIs given the prompt, write a poorly conceived comedy show in the style of a terrible writer. For something that's ostensibly a comedy, it is quite painfully unfunny. Its jokes feel more like sexual violations than humor, not least because the show is intent on forcing them into any given exchange with no lubricant. Immediately before the title slate, which for sensible people will serve the same function as the end credits, we get the discovery of a body in a locker. The head's been cut open, the brain is missing, leading to this hilarious reaction from Velma.
She has no brain! Oh, I'm not dissing her. She has no brain!
So far, so bad, where comedy's concerned. But Velma also aspires to be a narrative comedy, and it fares no better in this endeavor. Its first scene, post-title slate, essentially amounts to the writers throwing a bucket of expository shit at the screen and hoping some of it happens to stick. Velma is the suspect in the murder. The investigation is led by two lesbian cops, who are Daphne's adopted parents, who were supposed to have been investigating the disappearance of Velma's mother 2 years ago, but have seemingly forgotten all about it, leading an exasperated Velma to complain that lesbians are supposed to be good at solving crimes. Apparently under the impression, she tells us as much,
I thought lesbians were good at solving crimes. It's like the one positive stereotype perpetuated by cop shows.
I'm not sure that's true. We close this opening nonsense with the lesbo cops telling Velma that the only way they'll convince the sheriff that she's not responsible for the murder is to find the person who is, so she has to find the person who is. She has 24 hours in which to do it, because, yeah, that's how the police work. You get arrested as a murder suspect, you become a detective, you exonerate yourself. By the way, this isn't going to be a complete plot breakdown. I don't have the time. I also value my sanity. I am going to whiz through this faster than the Mystery Machine as driven by O.J. Simpson. We bump into Fred, who in this telling is a vaguely camp, misogynistic, rich white womanizer with a tiny penis. The show tells us all of this. It tells us it overtly. It tells us it several times. Fred, in his own words, has a condition that means he doesn't recognize people who aren't hot, meaning Velma, who isn't hot, because comedy. And in case this joke didn't land the first time, the show ensures we appreciate its full glory by repeating it, and repeating it, and repeating it, and repeating it, and repeating it. But if you thought the show being mildly annoying in this way was going to be its worst quality, oh no, absolutely not. Because whenever Velma isn't failing at traditional comedy, it tries what we might call, fucking weird?
Oh God! I know, but it's about priorities. Real talk, Shiro to Shiro. People only think you're a murderer because you're a creepy loser. But that will change tonight when you become a glamorous waitress.
This is just wrong. The setup is that Velma's dad shacked up with some waitress after her mum disappeared. Oh, sorry, wait, did I say setup? I didn't mean setup, because that information has very little bearing at all on whatever the hell we just watched. That was only there because they genuinely seemed to think it was funny. It's not to redeem the show that I say creepy surrealism at least shows some degree of imagination, because it's quite clear early on that this imagination has a desperateness to it. Whenever the show isn't doing whatever the hell that was, it is quite astonishingly one-dimensional. The knowing meta-commentary from the shower scene is revived for a funeral at the waitress's restaurant, where we're told the victim
was the rare slut that did not deserve to be murdered.
Thank you, Krista.
Was one of the rare sluts, yes, that's how the show refers to her repeatedly because comedy, who didn't deserve to be murdered. It does tonally balked meta-commentary in this scene because Daphne's here, and this is Daphne's single dimension. It happens every time she's on screen. This is probably the time to point out that the overwhelming feeling you're left with after 2 episodes of this stuff isn't anything happy or light-hearted or comedic. You're left with a definite sense of cruelty and spite from the humor in Velma. So many of the lines it uses, the stereotypes it depicts, the actions and the consequences it opts to display come across as deeply bitter, not funny. You're left in no doubt about the writer's own thoughts and feelings. You can probably get quite a good sense of their upbringing, the social set they were a part of, the social set they grew up hating. But swap that writer in your mind for a teenage boy. Let's say a teenage boy, single, a loner, wrote a script calling pretty girls brainless sluts and delighting in their murder that depicted the stereotypical alpha Chad as a tiny-dicked, airheaded idiot who unfairly gets all the idiot pretty girls and who deserves to be pulled down a few pegs, to be humiliated, to be destroyed and to lose his unearned privileges. If a loner teenage boy had written that, we'd call him an incel and we'd start fretting about online radicalization. So we have one-dimensional Fred, one-dimensional Daphne, one-dimensional popular kids, one-dimensional lesbo cops. We're then introduced to one-dimensional not Shaggy. Velma, our titular character, is ostensibly the most fleshed out of all these, but this is really all just a facade. She's pretty much one-dimensional as well. Her one dimension, though, is being viewed through the wacky kaleidoscope of the writer's imaginations. Her one dimension is quirkiness that manifests itself in the main as being a genius social spam. The quirkiness itself is consistently inconsistent, the underlying code of which being if plot progression, exposition, if exposition, joke. But very little of that is actually attached to anything. Not uncommonly, significant plot progression is achieved by the writers inserting random, disconnected skits that they and they alone found funny, which serve as the transition to and the setup for whatever thread of the story we'll be following for the next 5 minutes until we then go off and do something else. So we learn that Velma doesn't solve mysteries anymore, though she used to because her mum wrote mystery stories and she loved solving mysteries. She now believes her mother disappeared because she, Velma, solved a mystery, which means she now has vivid, Stranger Things hallucinations whenever she's mystery solving. Inconveniently, she has to solve a mystery to exonerate herself. How do we begin this adventure? Well, unfortunately, that weird pregnant lady skit from earlier, that's our launch pad on this occasion. She hates her dad's new girlfriend, which leads to a conversation with Not Shaggy about cameras, leading her to conclude that the girlfriend might somehow be responsible for the murders because she doesn't like her, which leads her to steal her dad's new camera, all of which I think is supposed to be the plot, though its main interest is quite clearly in setting up what passes for the show's comedy. The revelation that new girlfriend makes money by taking pictures of babies dressed as vegetables, for example, which ends this particular part of the investigation. Yes, that is a thing. Velma hallucinates when she tries to solve mysteries. This is called a mechanic, though what it's in aid of isn't particularly clear because of the unique way the show approaches narrative writing, which is to say nothing about the show makes sense, and random snippets of information are just thrown into a pot and jumbled around to serve more often as some kind of comedic setup for a painfully unfunny joke than as anything to do with the plot, character, or story. This is a very clever way of ensuring your audience actively tries not to pay attention to what you're subjecting them to, because if you do try and identify what's going on story-wise, if you do actually try and invest in it, you'll more often than not be met with the narrative equivalent of a rickroll and left trying to pick up the scattered pieces of your mind. For example, Velma has a 5-second character arc where she realizes that her mother didn't leave because she solved a mystery, she left because her husband, and baby Velma herself, were absolute who ruined her life. But the point of this isn't actually to tell a story. The point is that the writers want to throw in some random visual not humor in the form of flashbacks, where baby Velma sprays her mum with a hose, leading to her mum hitting herself in the eye with a cigarette, an eye that then comedically falls out of its socket in every subsequent flashback. Because comedy. You might think this constitutes character progression. It does, right up until the point at which it doesn't, because the show retcons that development in the course of its first 25-minute episode. The realization that her mum left because she hated her family and not because of some mystery Velma solved, for some reason leads Velma to conclude that she can now stop feeling guilty that she caused her mother to go missing, even though, in fact, she caused her mother to leave because she was horrible to her, which you'd think acts as grounds for more guilt, not less. But because that would constitute basically sensible character writing, Velma, of course, gives us the precise opposite. Her newfound guilt-free existence lets her sex herself up. This means she's instantly accepted by the fashionable set in school because, one dimension for everything. Until one of them points out that she's just trying to cover for the fact that she's a killer, at which point they all start throwing things at her, only for Fred to forget that his whole shtick is to forget unattractive people. He saves her from a flying computer keyboard, redirecting it, whereupon it chops the leg off a passing stranger because comedy. He gives a speech in her defense. She is accepted again, but not by Daphne's set. They accost her in the toilets, whereupon we get this.
Well, well, well. Well, well, well.
This is literally toilet humor, and it's literally the reason for the preceding scene. Nothing else of note was accomplished. Some more examples of humor that I couldn't be bothered to work into the script, but which are so bad, I figured, I'm just going to show you them. You'll know why I don't need to explain these. These are just terrible.
Why wouldn't he? If I were a rich white dude, I'd kill everybody just to get away with it.
That was Brenda's favorite song. And yeah, normally in pop culture, when a slutty girl is murdered, we're all a little like, well, maybe she deserved it. But
I saw you eat a fry out of the vacuum cleaner last week, so spare me, I've had a long day. People only think you murdered Brenda because you...
We're voted most revengey in the school yearbook. I know. Oh, those yearbook guys have no idea what's coming to them.
Velma, did you fall?
No, I'm cool and graceful like a swan.
Okay, because it really sounded like you fell.
That's the joke.
Velma hallucinates her way into Fred's house. Suspicion for the murder falls on Fred, who has a deep dark secret. Fred's deep dark secret is that he hasn't finished going through puberty yet. Yes, that's it. The murdered girl saw this, she found this out, but before Fred gets to tell us what he did to shut her up, he is shot through both legs by the lesbo cops. He then insists that he only paid the girl to keep her quiet, he didn't actually murder her, but nobody believes him, so he gets arrested.
Why wouldn't he? If I were a rich white dude, I'd kill everybody just to get away with it.
Not Shaggy, who not so secretly loves Velma, asks why she's still hallucinating if she now doesn't feel guilty for her mother's disappearance, even though she should. She reasons that, actually, this unfathomably shoddy piece of character work probably shouldn't have been done to begin with, so now she's reconvinced herself that her mystery solving led to her mother's disappearance because her mother loved her too much to leave her. Which, well, that renders the entire mini-arc a harrowing waste of time, no? I suppose it's mitigated a little bit by the fact the entire endeavour has been a harrowing waste of time, and it's frankly baffling it should ever have been made. They find another brainless body in a dumpster. That's the end of episode 1. Episode 2 begins with a gag that's almost funny, a TV ad for a luxury gentleman's clothing chain with the tagline,
What are you, poor?
Yeah, I almost smiled at that one, but then, unfortunately, the plot happened. The advert is there because this company is owned by Fred's dad, meaning Fred stands to inherit it. This is all covered in a news report during which the reporter butchers Velma's name.
Say my name.
Vermin Dorkley.
It's Velma Dorkley. I mean Dinkley.
Because comedy, only then to get her father's name correct.
Vermin's own father, Amon Dinkley.
When announcing that he, being a lawyer, has agreed to represent Fred. Because fuck consistency. Not Shaggy and Velma arrive at school and see a bunch of probably stoned students. Not Shaggy says he wants nothing to do with 420 culture, or 420 humor. He asks Velma if she knows what 420 is, and she says,
Yeah, it's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
Is this a joke? Is it a joke? I mean, it had the cadence of a joke. I think the writers thought it might be funny. If I were to attribute to them a level of intelligence they almost certainly do not possess, I'd suggest they were targeting their own audience with that one. You, at home, you moron who is unironically enjoying Velma, you will be absolutely stoned off your tits. You need a high dose of medical marijuana just to dull the pain that is this show. And now you've been seen by the show, and because you're so very high, you'll find this funny. At least until you sober up and realize what your life has become. Then you'll start crying, because you're watching Velma. Here is the number for the Samaritans. But oh wait, here am I watching Velma. I'm making jokes about people watching Velma and laughing at the jokes Velma is writing about them. There are so many layers. The lesbo cops drop Daphne off at school, and because Daphne is in the scene, we have to have a meta comment about teens in movies.
Thank you, but if the kids in every teen show ever can get through a brush with a deranged serial killer, so can I.
Because it's Daphne. This is what she does. It is the only thing she does. Velma asks Daphne to get hold of her mother's cold case file. Daphne says, nah. Velma gets hit by a frisbee. Because comedy. Lesbo cops announce they're going undercover as high school students to investigate the school's drug problem.
And that's the 411, home skillet.
Words.
They are very old, and they try to sound young and hip and cool. Because comedy. Velma asks Not Shaggy for $500 to give to Daphne to have her get the cold case file. Not Shaggy doesn't have that kind of money, but when she leaves the room, he has a brainwave. He says,
Wait. In teen movies, whenever a girl needs money, a guy sells something and then blackmails the girl into dating him for it. Problematic, but effective.
Now, I've not been a teenager for a few years, and I always hated teen movies. I'm reliably told by people in my comment section that I just hate everything after all, but I don't recall ever seeing a film with that as its premise. I mean, that's not to say that it never happens, but does it happen enough for it to be essentially a meme? Does it happen enough for this reference to make very much sense? Unless teen movies have changed a lot since I was an idiot, the answer is no. We learn that Daphne is the drug dealer, and because Daphne's in this scene, we get a meta comment about how TV tells us
According to TV, it's morally okay to deal drugs if your life is just kinda crappy. Like, your kid's sick, you're a widow with a mortgage, you have to live on a lake in Missouri.
Though Velma counters that this is only true for white people.
Those are all white people, Daphne. Minorities on TV can only deal drugs to escape poverty.
You'd think, for a show that only really has 3 jokes, the most frequently occurring of which is its meta-media commentary, that it might, I don't know, be better at it? And how do you not get pop culture references right? Anyway, you might have noticed a potential issue arising. Daphne has the file Velma wants. Daphne's parents are the lesbo cops. The lesbo cops are investigating the school's drug problem. Daphne has just told Velma that she's the drug dealer. Velma belatedly does spot this issue, but when she threatens to tell the lesbo cops that their daughter is a drug dealer, unless the drug dealing daughter gives her the file, Daphne gets angry. She says, "You wouldn't dare." Which doesn't change anything about her dilemma at all. Velma still has all the leverage. The only reason Velma would back down in the face of this vague threat is if the writers are hacks and need her to back down in order to keep what remains of the plot on the rails. So naturally, that is exactly what happens. We then get a long series of scenes where Velma tries to sell drugs for Daphne, but sucks at it because she keeps being mean to people because, she's a genius and she's a social spam. It happens again, it happens again. It happens again. The problem with repeat gags is that eventually, if you keep going that deep, you will throw up. And that shitty joke is better than anything in this show, which tells you how staggeringly unfunny the show is. Unlike the show, though, I know when and how to stop gagging, which is why I only repeated that shitty sex joke ironically. It takes practice, but eventually you can stop gagging entirely and you'll actually enjoy it. Which third iteration of the terrible sex joke actually serves as writing advice to the creators of Velma. Not Shaggy goes to try and sell a sword he owns to some shady people, while Velma's dad takes Fred to court. What follows is faintly horrifying, as seems always to be the case when the show dares venture out of bad pop culture jokes and try something surreal instead. Their plan, playing on Fred's prepubescence, has been to make him seem more like a cute child and therefore beyond suspicion and reproach. This is what the animators took from that instruction.
Hello, friends. My name is Fred. What's yours?
Because the joke needs this ploy to be successful, it is of course very successful, and a previously hostile journalist immediately recants and fawns over child Fred. It would have been very hard to make this funny, and it would have been nigh on impossible to make it believable, but were I tasked with doing either of the above, and you'd have to pay me a lot of money to take on any task so thankless as rescuing Velma, I'd probably not have made cute child Fred look so utterly fucking terrifying. The thanklessness of that task, by the way, is re-emphasized in the very next scene, because it starts raining, and this causes child Fred's makeup to run. A fake eyelash drops and gets stuck on his top lip. Meaning, yeah, he looks like Hitler now. And in case you missed how very funny this is, someone in the crowd points it out for us.
Oh God, he looks like Hitler! And not just because we compare everyone to Hitler these days.
Come on!
Well, yes, we do. That's an accurate observation. Well done. But once again, it's delivered with the cadence of a joke, and once again, I am really struggling to detect that fundamental core component of a joke, the comedy bit of it. Here's another example of the uniquely mirthless joke format this show specializes in.
Sorry I can't just conjure up a whole new personality whenever I want, like some sort of sexy witch.
Is that really what you think of me? Hey, girlies.
Honestly, after every single one of these attempts at humor, I keep imagining a cutaway to Jeb Bush pathetically saying, "Please laugh." Though if that did happen, I am sure this show would somehow find a way to make that not funny as well. It's like the supermassive black hole at the center of the comedic galaxy. It sucks all laughter from the cosmos. The show then decides that it's time to give Daphne a second dimension. Bold stuff from the writers. She tells Velma she's dealing drugs so she can afford a private investigator to look for her real family. Now, the last time we had character development, there is only one other occasion, was when Velma decided that she wasn't responsible for her mother's disappearance because her mother only disappeared because she was a No, that still makes no sense, but it became swiftly irrelevant anyway because Velma Don Drapered 5 minutes later and undid that character development. One instance is not enough to establish a trend, so Daphne's not guaranteed to renege upon this particular progression in the same way. I would say it's something to keep an eye on, but the odds of me continuing to watch this show after episode 2 are about as slim as the show doing something that makes me want to continue watching it after episode 2. Inconvenient lesbo cops then arrive on the scene and chase disguised Daphne and Velma, whose broken friendship is being reforged through the sheer lack of any other direction for the show to take. The chase sequence culminates with lesbo cops hitting a baby in their police car. Yeah, but the baby's fine though, don't worry, because otherwise it would have been morally reprehensible as opposed to being impossibly lucky not to have been morally reprehensible. The show then indulges in that peculiar brand of aborted joke that's arisen in the age of the social justice gender woo-woo.
God, where is that candy man? I mean, candy person. It could be anybody.
This is a curious development in comedy because the gender woo-woo movement has simultaneously made itself unignorable, but impossible to really refer to. You're obliged not to assume the gender of any given third party, as in this scene, which has the whiff of a comedic setup to it, and rightly so, given how innately hilarious modern culture's stance on the gender question is. But you cannot actually make gender woo-woo the punchline of a joke, because doing that makes you all manner of ists and phobics. You're obliged to abort the setup that you had no choice but to include. It's a joke that's so ashamed of itself that it doesn't let itself finish, but so obsessed with itself that it can't not begin, which is a sure sign of totalitarianism, that mini-true moment where Winston Smith has to try to force his brain to disregard the simple, logical nonsense the regime imposes on him as truth. Oh shit, I can't believe I almost got conceptual in a Velma review. We can't be having that. I don't want to cover the show any longer than I have to, let's just move swiftly on. Velma orchestrates a distraction that calls the lesbo cops away. They hit a load of American football players on a field as they drive off. As with the baby scene from earlier though, nobody actually dies, because the show can't actually decide what its relationship with gore and graphic violence is. We've already had a man decapitated by a flying computer keyboard, and we've had 2 brainless corpses, and we've had Fred shot twice through the legs, and we've had whatever the fuck this scene was. Yes, I am only playing that again because it makes you uncomfortable. You're welcome. Which might lead you to believe the show has no problem with surreal, consequence-free bloodshed, and that it might even be going for that kind of humor that makes the incongruity of bloodshed a comedic beat. But since then, we've had 2 opportunities to emulate that, very studiously swerved. I can understand not killing the baby, though by far the wisest course of action there would have been not to have the police car hit a baby in the first place, because the punchline it actually went with,
Baby want sheet cake?
Had what you might call an antipathetic relationship with humor. But hell, why not have the lesbo cops randomly mow down a bunch of college-aged football jocks? That would have been edgy. The show wants us all to think that it's edgy, yet it fakes out whenever the edge gets too close or too sharp. It doesn't seem to have the courage of its convictions. Daphne and Velma are still making up, and they're nearly making out. Are we going lesbo max here as well? I guess we'll see. Or, well, we won't see because I'm dropping this show as soon as possible. It's a figure of speech though, it's in the script now. I'm not putting any more work into this edit than the show put into finding a reason to exist. Anyway, we've gone 5 minutes without a random and convoluted moment of plot progression, so now we have Velma's dad offering to give her the $500 for the cold case file in exchange for Velma helping him prove that Fred, who she basically convicted, is actually innocent. She somehow convinces herself that he is innocent after all, and she tells the court as much. Though not before she manages to get out the entitled rich white guy with a small penis joke that wasn't funny the first 5 times it was deployed, and remains unfunny now.
But also that he was just another entitled rich guy who might kill someone because he has a tiny dong.
She convinced herself he was innocent, and convinced the court he is innocent because he's stupid. The show's moved on from his previous one dimension, the I only recognize hot people shtick, so now he is an idiot who can't cut his own food. A failed attempt in court proves that he is an idiot who can't cut his own food. Because a kid who can't cut his own food can't cut people's brains out, he is deemed too stupid to have committed the crime. He is innocent because he is dumb. He is dumb, and that is his one dimension. He's had 2 dimensions, but only one at a time, because comedy, I guess? I don't know. I don't care anymore. This public embarrassment makes idiot Fred angry. So he holds the knife menacingly aloft and says he absolutely could have killed the girls if he'd wanted to, leading the judge to pronounce him guilty because stupid Fred. Velma's response, by the way,
Wow, blonde-haired people have bad days too.
You see, the thing about playing on tropes for humor is that they do actually have to be, well, tropes. You can't just invent them on the spot and then have a character comment on them as if they're common knowledge. This is like creating an in-joke that you don't share with anyone except yourself, then telling it to an audience and expecting them all to laugh. Since when was blonde-haired people never have a bad day a thing? Velma's dad is very unhappy about this setback. He complains, and once again I quote,
Oh my God, what have I done? I'm ruined. They wouldn't even let me represent a gymnastics coach now.
You see, the thing about playing on tropes for humor is that they do actually have to be, well, tropes. You can't just invent them on the spot and then have a character comment on them as if they're common knowledge. This is like creating an in-joke you don't share with anyone except yourself and then telling it to an audience and expecting everybody to laugh. Since when was representing gymnastics coaches is something bad lawyers do a thing? Daphne turns up and gives Velma the cold case file. Daphne's in the scene, and so of course we get meta-commentary. This time, Daphne asks if Velma still has hallucinations when solving mysteries, and Velma tells her, "Not Shaggy helped me get over them in the last episode of my hallucinations." Yeah, that's basically her delivery too. In fact, I'm just going to play the clip because it is a masterclass in how not to deliver comedic lines.
Well, I think I'm fine. Norville helped me get over them in the last episode of my hallucinations.
Unfortunately, she then has another hallucination. And yes, we are going lesbo max. Daphne gets her out of the hallucination by kissing her, and then they have a smooch. And that's the end of the episode. Apart from a mid-credits scene with Fred in jail that is, as ever, only there to be funny, and that fails entirely at being funny. My abiding question about the show is how, and also why. How and why does it exist? How could anyone write this and submit it? How could it have so many directors, assistant directors, producers, executive producers, assistant executive producers, and still emerge in this state? How could anybody have read it and concluded, yeah, we should definitely spend lots of money bringing this to the screen? How did it take 2023, a mere 12 days, to produce a comedy worse than She-Hulk? Why did anybody think to do this with these characters? How did they get away with claiming it was based on Hanna-Barbera's creation? How did anybody think these jokes were funny? Why is this show? Is there anything good to say about it? Well, the animation isn't uniformly abysmal. It doesn't look like another Family Guy or Rick and Morty show. They seemingly stole whole chunks of the soundtrack from Stranger Things, so that's not terrible, I guess. But the rest really is really abysmal. I mean, it actually genuinely is worse than She-Hulk on the level of writing, comedy, and sheer mind-numbing pointlessness. I normally recommend that people watch the shows I review to form their own opinion, but in this case, I really recommend that you don't. Just save yourself the time. Do something more productive. Go hard-boil an egg. Sit and stare at a wall in silence for an hour. Do anything. Just don't watch this show.
1 week later.
Okay, I'm rather annoyed. I was quite prepared to move on from Velma. I posted a review of the first 2 episodes, it got 250,000 views in a day, and that was good enough for me. But then some absolute cucklet at HBO manually copyright claimed a 10-second segment and got that video taken down. Did I say I was feeling annoyed? Nah, fudge that. I'm feeling genocidal. I wasn't going to return to Velma. The first 2 episodes were so bad that returning to review the next felt like bullying the mentally disadvantaged kid in school. But since that mentally disadvantaged kid has apparently grown up and been given a lucrative job in HBO's Content ID department, and given they also came from my re-upload on equivalently indefensible grounds, I feel no shame whatsoever in returning to tear them a new one. Their attempt to suppress criticism has only invited more of it. So prepare yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, for a vicarious violation of the type legally banned from most pornographic websites. Ordinarily, I'd begin any follow-up video with a summary of what has gone before. What has gone before is one of the worst attempts at comedy ever devised for the screen. Something frivolously and sometimes nonsensical in those rare moments where it wasn't being bitter and nasty. Velma is investigating a murder and secondarily the cause of her mother's disappearance, which gives her PTSD-style flashbacks and hallucinations whenever she tries to solve mysteries. These will almost certainly turn out to be more than mere hallucinations, but we'll come to that presently. Probably. I don't actually know. It's not wise to place bets on where this sorry excuse for a plot is going because it doesn't obey any known laws. She's won Daphne over. These former best friends turned mortal enemies and then into a lesbian couple, which will almost certainly distress not Shaggy, who is not so secretly in love with Velma. To the extent anything besides the animation deserved any praise across the show's first 2 episodes, it was probably the make-up mini-arc between Velma and Daphne. And that only because it was just about the only aspect of the show that wasn't pointlessly cruel and spiteful. Speaking of pointlessly cruel and spiteful, stupid cockless idiot Fred has been blamed for the murder and effectively indicted himself because he is a stupid cockless idiot. Despite one of the show's many white people bad jokes, resting on the claim that rich white people always get away with crimes. Aidan Paladin had one of the more interesting observations about the show's characterization of Fred, noting how odd it is that a writing team presumably all in on modern gender woo-woo and all against bogeyman concepts like body shaming should here have spent so much of their time ridiculing a boy whose puberty is stalled for the resultingly shameful bodily effects. This is apparently forgivable because Fred is rich and white. The show makes it overtly clear and repeatedly clear that it considers white people so far beneath the standards of decency all other groups deserve that they might as well be non-people.
Yeah, but isn't it a little comforting to see a rich white guy get wrongly convicted for once?
I'm too distracted to enjoy it.
Its great sin and great accomplishment is to be so unsubtle in its portrayal of quote-unquote woke standards that even the Woko Haram set hate it, because Velma holds a magnifying glass to the small print we're all supposed to ignore. There's precious little difference, as I noted in my last video, between the humor in Velma and the screed of an incel, except for the racial element to its not humor. In a sense, Velma is the logical endpoint of our current socio-political era. It tries so hard that it's deemed ridiculous by those it tries to please, while, at least according to this Yahoo writer, somehow not going far enough, because the show apparently doesn't reflect the nuance of South Asians' ethnic identities, despite Velma being Mindy Kaling and Mindy Kaling being South Asian, despite it being a cartoon, despite it being obviously absurd. The problem, according to the writer, is that Kaling centers whiteness as a source of validation and displaces brownness across her series, which flat contradiction with the preceding call for nuance might have been noticed had the writer even the most basic grasp of irony. Apparently, Velma the show spent so much time on so many iterations of white man bad, which is fine, that it neglected to have Velma the character represent the specific ethnic qualities of a whole subcontinent, and that is unforgivable, which is about as understandable a gripe as me complaining that my specific region of England is insufficiently represented in Adventure Time, but hey-ho. Episode 2 ended with Daphne snogging Velma to save her from her hallucinations, and Fred in jail with the murder as yet unsolved. So on we go to episode 3, which opens immediately after the Daphne-Velma smooch, Velma asking, "What the hell just happened?" A question that occurred to me roughly every 15 seconds while watching the previous 2 episodes. I mentioned in the first video how unconventional is the show's relationship with humor and with narrative writing, what with it being next to impossible to distinguish the setup for some terrible joke from the setup for some terrible plot progression. The show tries very hard to make us laugh, which perhaps explains why it's so unsuccessful. Episode 1 gave us 2 cockroaches fucking because comedy. It gave us dancing pregnant women because comedy. It gave us interminable meta commentary because comedy. It all feels entirely disconnected from, well, anything of substance. And episode 3 continues in much the same vein, Velma being told off by her dad for feeding the cat the pregnant waitress's prenatal vitamins.
You fed the cat Sophie's prenatal vitamins!
Oh, sorry.
Because comedy? No, I'm still not laughing. It takes episode 3 exactly 1 minute and 47 seconds to throw in its first meta joke. Not Shaggy, predictably enough, is unhappy that Velma and Daphne kissed, not least because, and I quote,
"It reduces me to a cliched straight best friend."
Norville.
Velma responds that in this day and age,
you can't speculate about someone's sexuality unless they're famous or Peppermint Patty.
I don't know who that is. It was as if a million shippers cried out in rage and were suddenly silenced. I think it really does deserve to be restated. This is a show that has maybe 3 comedic devices, and of these 3, by far the most commonly used is its meta pop culture references, which makes it absolutely astounding that almost none of its meta pop culture references actually reference anything in pop culture. I'm not even sure the wokest of the woke set forbid themselves from speculating about sexuality. I'm not aware of any set which forbids such speculation. It's fucking everywhere, from people shipping anime characters to historians speculating about the sexuality and gender of corpses. Gone are the bad old days where people could be either gay, straight, or bi. We've added so many letters and symbols to the acronym purely to accommodate people whose sexual identity is, shall we say, speculative? So no, once again, this meta joke commentary isn't meta, isn't funny, and doesn't really comment on anything real. Shaggy has told his dad about the kiss. His dad is the school therapist, which news occasions this, joke?
The lowest form of therapist. He's worse than the free therapy app I downloaded that's obviously Russian spyware.
О, это Вельма. Интересно, она гей?
Oh my god. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Honestly, if Velma's accomplished anything, It's instilling in people a newfound sense of talent and ability. Maybe it's worth dusting off that play you wrote in high school. Yes, it might be absolutely terrible, but it can't be any worse than this. You might as well give it a shot. You might even get commissioned. It just gets so much worse. The school calls an assembly to announce a new focus on students' mental health, at which the principal declares that all girls will be required to take a self-defense class. This prompts Velma to ask, why don't boys have to take a Don't Murder Girls class? To which she is told,
because I only have $50 in the budget to combat centuries of toxic masculinity.
Honestly, you can see why some people, coping harder than they've ever coped before, have suggested that Mindy Kaling is a secret conservative and Velma is actually a right-wing psyop, even though the only evidence for this is that Kaling once liked a tweet by the one person in the wizarding world who is apparently worse than Voldemort. You can see why, but it is a cope. And these people have no business complaining. If you don't like that Velma is making your ideology cringe, you really have to explain why what it does fails your ideology. So far, Velma's crime has simply been to state that ideology without masking its absurdities in social justice word salad. This little clip being a case in point. Self-defense classes are demonstrably useful, and yet they are disparaged. Velma asks why we can't just teach boys generally to stop murdering girls generally, which is a demonstrably useless strategy. The teacher accedes to the premise of this argument, the problem is toxic masculinity, even though it doesn't exist, and only rejects it because the school can't afford to undo centuries of cultural damage, which I think is supposed to be the joke. If you, as a believer in toxic masculinity and a disparager of women's agency, cringe at this joke, it's not because you disagree with it, it's because it's been said in an unfashionable way, and without fashion, your belief looks nonsensical. Inevitably, the self-defense teachers are Daphne's lesbo-cop mums, but Velma drags Shaggy off to visit Fred before the show has a chance to do something cringy with this setup. It's probably time to remind everyone that the overarching story of this show is Velma figuring out what happened to her mother. The show also thinks it's time to remind everyone, because even it treats its main plot as an afterthought, the prison scene being a case in point. Having bizarrely informed the world that modern society doesn't let people speculate about sexuality, even though it does, Velma and not Shaggy here continue to speculate about Velma's sexuality. She is attracted to Daphne, she's also attracted to Fred. What could this mean? She's very confused. But she doesn't have time to interrogate it for very long because she needs to find out what happened to her mum. Remember that? Look, here's that cold case file. And so anyway, is Velma straight? Is she gay? She just mentions a mystery, and so the show's only consistent mechanic has it that she must have vivid hallucinations. But this time, they consist not of her mother, but of a monstrous Daphne and a monstrous Fred trying to kiss her. Because, to hell with the A plot, actually. For some reason, the fact she tripped out and rolled around on the floor for a bit means she gets kicked out of prison, so she can't question Fred about her mum's disappearance, which was the sole reason they went to the prison to begin with, and so the sole reason the last 6 minutes happened. You thought there might be plot progression here? Well, expectations subverted, lol. Absolutely nothing of any significance occurred. Because the absolute basics of writing are beyond the creators of Velma, the marginally more advanced bits of writing, and I do stress the word marginally, are beyond them as well. So it is that during the prison visit, time in the rest of the world slowed almost to the point of stopping, meaning Velma can leave the prison at the beginning of the Lesbo Cop self-defense class and return from prison some considerable time later at the beginning of the Lesbo Cop's self-defense class. Velma and Daphne are chosen to roleplay self-defense, which is of course very awkward. It spurs a conversation between them in the bathroom about how very awkward it is. If I'm going out of my way to find something positive to say about the show, this developing relationship is probably the only bit I can find to praise. As mentioned, it's unique in the show for being anything other than vicious and spiteful. When together, Velma and Daphne do almost resemble actual characters. It's a not unsalvageable relationship that at times even conveys a bit of warmth and care, making it by far the strongest aspect of the narrative, which is unfortunate because it is effectively a B-plot sideshow that distracts from what's meant to be the strongest aspect of the narrative, the actual A-plot of the show. Velma and Daphne seemingly agree that they don't really like each other in that way, but then they beat the shit out of each other in the self-defense class, suggesting that they were both lying, in whole or in part. This episode's main focus transpires to be a self-defense competition to be held the next day, but because we've just discovered what the point of the episode is, we must of course now detour from it as quickly as possible, lest the audience actually be able to follow what's going on. So we jump back to the prison where not Shaggy is trying to get information from Fred via therapy, because You might recall, the main story of this show is supposed to be finding Velma. So anyway, back at the self-defense tournament, Velma advances through the first round by beating a girl whose whole shtick, because everyone in this show tops out at one dimension, is some kind of silicone butt implant.
Protect my butt! Please, throw me on my face!
Sorry, I can't tell which one's which.
Which is yet another occasion to remind everyone that these are supposed to be high school kids, and so only, 15, 16 years old? I don't consider myself especially prudish, but this show really is a bit, prurient about its cast of predominantly minor girls. With an air of crushing inevitability, Daphne and Velma both advance to the final, with one scene in which Daphne actually stabs an opponent multiple times with a pen, sending blood spurting everywhere because comedy? Not Shaggy's therapist dad gives Not Shaggy a cardigan because cardigans make therapists brilliant. Comedy. You might recall that earlier in the episode, the whole point of Not Shaggy's dad's character was to be mocked because nobody takes therapists seriously.
Your dad is a high school guidance counselor, the lowest form of therapist. See, your dad is worse for teen mental health than waist trainers.
And welcome to the Crystal Cove High School Mental Health Assembly. How y'all doing? Good?
Bad, you idiot!
But because the plot now needs therapists to be taken seriously, they have magical powers now. Not Shaggy dons the cardigan on his next meeting with Fred, and the effect is that Fred instantly trusts and opens up to him. Why doesn't this work for Not Shaggy's dad, who gave him the cardigan to begin with? Well, the best interpretation is that the writers just hadn't thought of it then. Fred relates some pointless story about his father being a dick, because, he has daddy issues. He mentions that some Indian lady showed up, which piques Not Shaggy's interest, leading Fred to say,
Why, you into that? Respect.
Into what? Into Indian woman? Why should that be particularly unusual, show? Why should that be uniquely worthy of respect? This is a slightly strange remark, show. And so we crash into what's supposed to be the climax of the self-defense tournament. Daphne versus Velma. The tension is positively intangible. Velma, however, derails it by revealing that she's stolen Daphne's diary, which she will read aloud to the entire audience in a bid to prove that Daphne is vulnerable and therefore make her lose the self-defense school class thing. That's definitely what's happening. There's absolutely no reason Daphne should be letting her do this, of course. She's already kicked the shit out of Velma once. You might remember that in the last episode, Velma tried to blackmail Daphne into giving her the significantly more important cold case file, only to back down when Daphne got mildly angry at her. The show is established that Velma fears Daphne, and that Daphne is stronger than Velma, and that Daphne has easy recourse to violence to achieve her goals. But because all of that would be very inconvenient for the writers in this moment, in this scene, they've forgotten all about it in order to have Daphne stand obligingly back while Velma tries to embarrass her. How does she do this? What's the worst thing Velma has found in Daphne's diary? Well, I hope you're sitting down for this. It's a real shocker. It turns out Daphne has regular sessions with the school therapist. And, that's it. Now, this doesn't work. But it doesn't not work for the reasons you'd think it wouldn't work. It shouldn't have worked because Daphne shouldn't have let Velma read from the diary in the first place. It shouldn't have worked because Velma didn't actually find anything really scandalous to read from the diary. But in the show's mind, it doesn't work because the students, previously established to be a mix of stoners and otherwise psychopathically fashionable people, none of whom are what you might call caring, announce that
mental health is no joke, no matter how lame Lamont is.
Yeah, no matter how lame I am.
They announce this even as they mock the school counselor, Not Shaggy's dad, who's back to being the butt of the jokes for reasons the show contradicted 5 minutes ago, but fuck it. Anyway, with this newfound support, Daphne rounds on Velma and proceeds to kick the shit out of her again. Here again, we get that new genre of comedy the show has decided to go in for, the suspicious joke. In the counselor's office, Velma is told the only way she'll avoid suspension is if she apologizes to Daphne. Velma points out that Daphne beat the shit out of her, to which the school counselor replies,
Yes, but you hurt her feelings, which is way worse these days.
Yeah, that is a bit suspicious. I can well see why certain leftists have come to believe this show is a cunning right-wing psyop. But as P.J. O'Rourke once observed, the problem with leftists of this particular sort is that they believe the whole world is as stupid as they are. They believe in wild conspiracy theories that explain their own failings, therefore the entire world must be one big conspiracy that causes them to fail. This is one such example. The much more plausible explanation for this show's occasional ribbing of leftist shibboleths, like this joke about hurt feelings, is that the writers of the show are vaguely aware of the shibboleths, and they think it might be worthwhile taking lazy shots at some of them in order that they appear to be more radically balanced in their approach to comedy than they actually are. That's not to say the show doesn't have the effect of a right-wing psyop, and a very successful one at that, but it's always better to attribute to stupidity before you attribute to malice, although, admittedly, in Velma's case, we should probably attribute basically everything about it to stupidity and malice. Not Shaggy's notoriously incompetent therapist dad has to be competent again in this scene, and he gets Velma to open up to him. Then he has to be incompetent again in order that Velma be credited for the insight he nearly offered about her avoiding her problems and thereby making those problems worse.
Hasn't not talking to someone else gotten you even further from finding her?
Okay, that feels smart, but it's coming from you, so...
Yeah, no, I surprised myself there.
Now, the show could demonstrate a basic level of competence here by having the therapist dad a recurring, almost Buddha-like character, a guru, whose incompetence is really just a disguise for kindly suppressed genius, thereby turning his rapid-fire inconsistency into something both consistent and deliberate. But there are two main barriers to this approach. In the first place, it requires a basic level of competence, which I think we've established by now is something these writers do not possess. But simultaneously, and at least as importantly, it would also require that these writers be kind toward a straight white male authority figure. And if there's one thing these writers hold less of than competence, it's kindness. So I'd be very surprised if this character ever rises above the level of wildly inconsistent joke figure.
Up to you, Velma. But sometimes when you're being attacked, the best thing to do is...
Go limp. You're right.
I was gonna say, go for the eyes!
Yeah, just as I was saying, a wildly inconsistent joke figure. In the car with Not Shaggy, we get another version of the rich guys get away with everything joke.
Isn't it a little comforting to see a rich white guy get wrongly convicted for once?
I'm too distracted to enjoy it.
Alright. Can we please just move on from this? It's really quite painful. The show's already shot itself in the foot with this one before, Velma stating that rich white people get away with murder only for rich white Fred to get wrongly convicted of murder. It's too little to salvage it now by having Not Shaggy say, "Isn't it great to see a rich white dude get wrongfully convicted for a change?" No, you've already refuted the rule your original joke relied on. And quite apart from that, and quite apart from the obvious nonsense of that trope, it's just not funny. This is crutch humor. Every other joke they try falls flat, and the writers shamefacedly say, "But white people, am I right?" And they expect the audience to forgive them and to laugh along. Just fuck off. Velma goes to apologize to Daphne, where we learn that Daphne has abandonment issues. Her parents abandoned her, Velma abandoned her, but they resolve to be friends again. And you know what? Despite everything, and despite how abysmal the rest of the show is, and despite the fact I'm still fucking seething that HBO killed my best performing video with its dubious copyright claim, I'm gonna be the bigger person. This scene isn't terrible, and because a disproportionate amount of this episode is actually focused on the not quite but near enough to be a relationship, I don't find myself ending episode 3 feeling quite as scornful and perplexed as I ended episode 2. This was a better episode overall. It wasn't uniquely awful. It wasn't unremittingly bad. It actually had its moments. But of course, this relationship stuff is supposed to be the B plot. The B plot is supposed to complement the A plot. There is still an A plot, but there are also about 15 other random plot threads the show occasionally remembers it has, any of which it could take at any given moment, or not as the case may be. And the B plot actually distracts from the A plot more than it contributes to the A plot, which is not how things are supposed to work. And anyway, episode 3 ends with a calling card for an insane asylum falling out of Not Shaggy's cardigan, causing him to interrogate his father about it, whereupon we learn that there is some deep dark secret about Not Shaggy's mother. Fine. Another plot thread. I wonder where this one's going. We close with another mid-credit scene where we get some more pointless cruelty at Fred's expense, and then we're on to episode 4. Which begins by remembering that it has a fragment of a plot concerning a serial killer. Not that we've had much about that across the last 2 episodes. There has been another murder with the same MO. The fact it happened while Fred was in prison means that Fred must be innocent, so he's being released now, which is fine, I suppose. Except that it makes every single second debating this point in the last 3 episodes entirely redundant. The sheriff informs a gathered crowd that they found a pattern in the murders. All the murdered girls are hot. Yes, show, they're also like 15, but whatever, I guess. Mindy Kaling is not hot, and she's never been hot, meaning she has to exorcise this particular demon by being mean about the hot girls in Velma. Disappointingly, what might have been a single unfunny gag has in fact been turned into the setup for this entire episode. So the police announce a plan to rank the 5 hottest girls in the school. Yes, the police are going to rank the 5 hottest 15-year-old girls in a high school in order to attach each of them a police escort. You could make some very dark jokes based on this setup, some very dark jokes indeed. But Velma won't do that, because as established in the last video, it only really possesses a kind of masquerade edginess. It hits very safe targets in very tediously safe ways. But it won't ever risk a joke or a skit that might be considered truly daring or edgy. A daring or edgy show would probably lean into the essential creepiness of what's just been set up for this episode. It might even use it to take shots at rapey policemen, or a culture of rape in the police, or to make a serviceable meta comment about the sexualization of young girls in society. And it could still do all of this, but, well, it won't, will it? Because it's Velma, and Velma isn't actually very good, or even clever. As with every other ostensibly comedic setup in this show, it's done to death within the first 5 seconds and then the corpse is violated repeatedly thereafter. The police call their plan the Hope Initiative, which translates as parties only, puke faces excluded? Fucking puke faces, what the hell are we? Is this like 1995? Velma's problem, by the way, isn't that the police should be formalizing the sexualization of young girls. No, that's basically fine. That complaint would have had some substance to it, but no. Her problem is that the police officers doing it are middle-aged white guys.
Wait, so a couple of middle-aged white dudes are gonna decide which of us are hottest?
Yeah, that's the thing to object to. That's definitely the thing we should be complaining about with this setup. That's the only objectionable thing about it. It's that the creepy old men sexualizing high school girls are white. Honestly, will you just try for once following these weird little thoughts through to their conclusion? Are you really trying to say that sexualizing high school girls is fine so long as the people doing it are diverse? That this problem wouldn't be a problem if it were a black man sexualizing the girls? Is that really what you want to imply? The police actually spot the image problem they've created here and suggest that Velma creates the list instead. Because we have the corpse of a comedic setup to bugger, the police point out that Velma is, and I quote,
"who is in no danger from a hot girl murderer."
Because Velma isn't hot, you see? Because comedy. I can't even with this writing. It can't even do jokes I think it really shouldn't be doing. Every time it gets close to one, it manages to mangle it up and force it back to the safest territory, which is to say a joke the show has already done 15,000 times, which amounts to Velma's fugly, lol. It's also very, very pointless. Velma and Daphne do some more abortive flirting. Daphne now has enough money to hire a detective to hunt for her real parents because the show needs to do plot progression now, so it's just decided as much. Even though part of the plot of episode 2 had Daphne and Velma selling drugs to fund this endeavor and failing because Velma is a social Consequences? What even are those? Incidentally, it should be noted at this point that Daphne's one dimension has changed without recognition over the course of the previous 2 episodes. It used to be that she was the reason and the excuse for meta-commentary. That was her one thing. Her thing now is that she wants to find her missing parents and she has the hots for Velma. The rule previously established is that every character can have precisely one dimension at a time. Has this development actually given us, well, development? Does Daphne now have 2 dimensions? At the same time? It's distinctly possible. Jesus, I wonder how long the show will be able to keep this up. Anyway, the creation of the hot girl list affords the show a chance to sexualize more young girls in a montage of sorts. Velma wandering around and the list candidates being as overtly sexual as possible. Now look, I'm not an American, I know, with this accent, that's a shock. And so I don't know exactly how American state schools work, except in that they famously don't work very well. But from what I understand of it, American high schoolers have an age bracket ranging from about 14 to 18. The most charitable interpretation possible is that most of these girls are 18-year-old high school seniors, right? In which case, the sexual montage is only quite creepy. Except, of course, that we've already had the shower scene between girls, some of whom were Velma's age, and Velma is, I think, 15. So if the show hasn't been especially careful to avoid perving on underage girls previously, why should we assume it's being any more careful here? The writers of Velma have gone for a kind of sexualized hyper-reality. And again, the subjects here are almost certainly children, which makes these scenes not only creepy, but quite definitely pervy. And that is reason number 16,324 to ask, just how the hell was this show ever greenlit? Anyway, remember how Velma can't decide who she really fancies, Fred or Daphne? No? Well, we're doing it again, so you have no choice. Which is the occasion of perhaps the show's most tone-deaf, staggeringly hypocritical moral lesson so far, as Velma tells Not Shaggy,
men make everything about them and what they want. Our whole lives, girls are told by guys there's a right way to be hot, and I'm not it. Guys even teach us to be ashamed of our own bodies. But also that he was just another entitled rich guy who might kill someone because he has a tiny dong. He's been so pampered, his body hasn't even felt the need to fully mature. Fred's a rich white guy with a tiny dong.
Once again, the reason so many people have attempted to brand this show a right-wing psyop is because it deploys all their ideas and beliefs without the subtlety required to sustain them. Unintentionally and ironically, it reveals the double standards, the hypocrisy, of that set of people who won't shut up about the primacy of feelings over facts, who won't stop policing your thoughts, who won't stop bleating about imagined slights and invented crimes, ists and phobics. That these are also the most callous, judgmental, bigoted and bitter people in the world is the irony being exposed unintentionally by the show. The hypocrisy on display here is just staggering. I mean, it really is staggering. Velma gives a speech lambasting the male gaze, beauty standards, and body shaming. This is the same Velma who simps on Fred because of his looks, while repeatedly mocking his body and his brain. It's like cry bullying. Standards for me, but not for thee. It's no wonder the woke haram lot want to disown the show. It so perfectly captures their disingenuity. Fred is released from prison, and Velma meets him in a diner. It's been decided that he is the perfect person to write the hot girl list. Fred, by the way, he's completely lost both of his previous dimensions in this scene. He began episode 1 with a condition that prevents him from recognizing hot girls. He was just a misogynist. Yet here he is, chatting with Velma, whom he recognizes, even though the setup for the whole fucking episode is that she has to write the list because she isn't hot. His second dimension was his staggering stupidity that replaced his boilerplate misogyny. The reason he landed in jail to begin with was that he was an idiot. But that's now being replaced by a variant on the old first misogynistic dimension. Here, he just lusts over hot girls again, but at the expense of the stupidity that defined him until 5 seconds ago. Velma explains that he's the perfect pick to write the list because he once wrote an essay entitled From Freud to Jung, An Exploration in Horniness. So, stupid Fred, who doesn't recognize ugly people, here recognizes an ugly person and is clever enough to have heard about and referenced Freud and Jung in an essay? Because comedy, I guess? Fucking hell, show. That almost goodwill generated by the previous episode, and that's being very swiftly eroded. In fact, I think it's all gone now. Now I just feel very bitter about it again. Credit where it's due, though. The show then does make a pop culture reference that actually references pop culture. Velma gives Fred a copy of The Feminist Mystique, which Fred assumes references Mystique from the X-Men, and he asks if the book is about which Mystique actress is hotter. It's not funny, because this gag died years ago, and the corpse has been fucked so many times in so many directions it's developed a secondary arsehole, but at least it makes sense. Not Shaggy goes to visit Daphne, because he wants to figure out why Velma likes her. The plot wants to take an unexpected turn here. A non-existent person throws a geodude. Sorry, we're staying in the script. A geode, fucking geodude, throws a geode through Daphne's window. Not Shaggy informs us that it's a geode from the crystal mines in town, which is an old tourist attraction, and that, I suppose, means that they're off to explore. Say, remember how the last episode closed with Not Shaggy's dad about to reveal some deep dark secret about Not Shaggy's mum and her connection to an insane asylum? Well done you, because the show doesn't. Say, remember how this episode has been mostly about Velma's quest to create the list of hot girls who need police protection? Well done you, because apparently the show doesn't. Or rather, if it does, it's just got bored of it. Because when Velma hands that list in to the police realize they don't need to give the girls police protection after all. Rather, what they need is for Velma to teach those hot girls how to be intelligent so they aren't at risk anymore. Because guys don't like intelligent girls. Because this is the feminism episode. You can tell that because of the way Velma keeps mentioning feminism, just like she didn't in all of the other episodes. So Velma starts trying to educate the hot girls in how not to be hot by being intelligent instead, while Daphne and Not Shaggy go to investigate the origin of the geode. Fred, meanwhile, finishes the feminine mystique and has his character reformed by it. He suddenly starts paying more attention to less attractive but rather more talented and intelligent women, and when he realizes this, he freaks out. I'm not even sure if this is because comedy. I think we've just reached the point where it's no longer possible to tell if Velma's even trying to tell jokes. Now, I think we all agree that what we really needed now is a flashback about the history of the town, which is exactly what we get. Yay! Not Shaggy gives us a history lesson that's, well, it's completely redundant because it's not funny and it doesn't actually impact the plot in any way, though we should probably be thankful about that, because whenever the show does attempt to impact the plot, it is usually incomprehensible. As in this case, where Daphne faintly remembers visiting the Crystal Museum as a kid, and so posits that the geode was actually thrown by her birth parents. Why? Oh, fuck it, who cares? Velma presents the newly uglified girls to the police chief, but it turns out they've made themselves up to look hot again, which causes the police chief to say,
Ooh, they are so hot, Daddy likey. Wait!
Yes, daddy probably is the right word, because these are fucking children. My god, show, it's almost but nowhere near enough to distract you from more lessons in feminism, because those follow. Most bad shows can go an entire run without being either this pervy or this cringy, but Velma has both in spades. That's an achievement of a kind. And it just goes on, and it goes on and on and on. In the next scene, Velma is dressed as whatever this is. I mean, I assume it's a non-binary of some sort, because she says,
I have no clue how to be a woman in a way that doesn't judge other women.
So she's showing her support for all the ways women wait, what? I know, I genuinely, no, I don't follow. I have no idea what the show's getting at with this one. Well, anyway, Velma's dad's waitress girlfriend goes into labor at this moment, but when Velma tries to get help, the police assume from the way she's dressed that she's the crazy serial killer, which, yep, I mean, if you've ever seen weird non-binary nutters on TikTok, you would probably assume that too. Again, what the hell is this whole skit supposed to be saying, though? Is it even supposed to be saying anything? It's all delivered as though the writers have some kind of point they want to be making, but I cannot, for the life of me, work out what that point is. The weirdness continues. For some reason, rather than finding help, everyone just wants to watch the woman give birth.
All right, everybody, we got ourselves an official tender moment. A woman is experiencing the sacred miracle of childbirth. Come on, fellas, it's show and tell time.
Wait, no, where are you going?
One of the hot girls tells Velma,
A lady is giving birth in front of school. This is literally why social media exists.
Stop! Or at least get my ring light. It's in the trunk.
which, no, I'm pretty sure this isn't the payoff to whatever the weird setup was leading to, but at least it's back on more familiar ground in that it's the kind of boring meta-knock humor the show usually indulges in. Velma's mini-mission here has been to get cars to move so the ambulance can park right next to the pregnant waitress. She fails, and the ambulance parks up about 10 feet away, which the show seems to think means it can't possibly help because, you know, ambulances actually apply healing buffs, but their area of effect is incredibly small. It's not like they're staffed by paramedics who can carry equipment 10 feet. What a silly suggestion. If that were true, how would the show have an excuse to botch another of its messages with a bad joke? Velma tries to get the hot girls to do a sexy dance to distract people, which bears no relationship to her original goal because that was to get the cars to move, but they refuse to do it anyway. So she tries to do one. It doesn't work. She asks why, and this prompts Gigi, this is the one I think people thought was going to be called Scooby for some reason, prompts Gigi to tell her that she needs to own her sexiness and not dance like a, well, here's a game that's not fun because we already know the answer. Velma has given us a simile. Do not do X like fill in the missing word. Is it A, like an idiot, B, like a lizard, or C, like a white person? Well, we're watching Velma, so the answer is and always will be C, a white person. Well done.
You have to own it. You look like a white influencer trying to choreograph her own dance instead of just stealing one.
Somehow, this leads to a moment of realization from Velma. What does she realize? Well, she realizes that it's perfectly fine to be whatever kind of woman you think you are, just like nobody told her she couldn't be. She doesn't want to own her sexiness, just as the hot girls don't want to not be sexy. Both of these things she realizes are fine. And that's it. That's what this entire few minutes has been about. Velma realizing something that's obvious to everyone who hasn't read intersectional feminism in college. And because Velma's had her character moment, it means the hot girls do as well. No, this still doesn't work. She asked them to do a sexy dance. They refused because they told her they only do that kind of thing for themselves. Velma then has a character moment and realizes that their version of femininity is just as legitimate as hers is, and vice versa. This, for some reason, means the hot girls are now willing to do the sexy dance for her. No, it's just, why do you... That's not how character writing works. Oh, whatever, I guess. The plot needs its resolution. So they dance to lead men away like zombies, while Velma goes and punches people for no explicable reason, which, with equivalent lack of explicable reason, causes Fred to fall in love with her now. Meanwhile, at the Crystal Caves, the show tries to do a funny.
I feel like all the answers to my questions about my parents are in there.
The bathrooms?
Wait, I mean in there.
It's funny because she pointed at the toilets by accident. Not Shaggy still thinks this is all an elaborate ruse by the serial killer to trick Daphne inside, while the writers forget how they actually managed to give Daphne something like a believable character development in the last episode, so instead they decide to throw some random new passion into her personality. She wants to find her parents so she can learn why she's so different from everyone else. Is she different from everyone, you may ask, besides the possible lesbianism bit? Didn't she fall out with Velma because she joined the fashionista clique and became just like them? Well, yes. But now the writers have decided that what makes her different from everyone else is that she loves danger. We know this because the show has Daphne tell us that this is why she's different from everyone.
Finding my parents is the only way to figure out why I'm so different from everyone. This is gonna sound crazy, but I love danger.
We even get more flashbacks to substantiate it. Could it be that the writers have only done this because they needed an excuse to progress Not Shaggy's character in the quickest way possible? Yes, I think that might be it. Not Shaggy has been trying to figure out Daphne's personality in order that he can impress Velma by being like Daphne. But that little arc has to come to an end. So the writers have arbitrarily decided that Daphne likes danger, and this makes Not Shaggy sad, because he hates danger, so he can never be like her, even though he also hates stupidity, which is his reason for abandoning her momentarily, though he said he can learn how to be stupid, and would have been stupid, because he hung out with her. The problem here isn't the device. The device is actually, well, it could be quite good, at least on paper. The problem is the way the device has been deployed to give what should be a character-deepening moment all the severity of, well, of the rest of the show, really. It's another variant of the show's biggest problem in its character writing. Because it takes the most quirky and convenient ways to move its plot along, it adds and subtracts character traits on a whim. And because it adds and subtracts character traits on a whim, its characters don't actually take on any real personality. There is no Fred. There is no Daphne. There are 3 or 4 Freds and 3 or 4 Daphnes, meaning you can't actually work anything but a spur-of-the-moment joke out of any of them. You can't have a long-running character setup deliver a payoff based on the known rules of the characters' personalities, because there are no known rules. Every joke has to be in the moment, a one-off, a contrivance worked into being in the same scene in which it's deployed, which is why all of these characters are the butt of jokes and never actually involved in any of them. And it actually becomes quite annoying, because just when you think you might have developed some understanding of these characters and their motives, and so the plot that they're a part of, it's all just torn up in front of you. Not Shaggy and Daphne go to this abandoned amusement park because Daphne is intent on finding her real parents, and Not Shaggy wants to learn about Daphne to make Velma love him. Not Shaggy's been portrayed as the only feeling character in the entire show, and the only one you think might have some kind of conscience and selfless motives. Yet here, as soon as he realizes he can never be like Daphne, and so has no further use of her, he just palms her off dismissively and leaves, because there's no point him wasting his time on her unless he can get some sort of reward for it.
Sorry, Norville, but trust me, there's someone other than Velma out there for you.
Yeah, sorry, I can't do this dumb talk anymore. I'm gonna hop.
What?
Which makes him just as much of a selfish jerk as every other character. And Daphne, meanwhile, who wants so much to find her real parents to understand why she's so different to everyone, well, as soon as Not Shaggy announces he's leaving, she abandons her mission entirely.
You can't just leave me here. I'm not afraid of who's in there. I'm just afraid they'll think I'm a loser who couldn't get friends to come with them.
Making her just as much of a selfish, entitled jerk as every other character in the show. This really is a special kind of pointlessness. These people are anti-characters. It's not just that they're inconsistent, it's that they will consistently abandon anything approaching a settled personality and motive set. How the hell could these writers convince themselves that anyone in the audience would invest in the show when its overarching meta is that any investment you make will return losses? Somehow, punching random people in a crowd and not moving the cars has allowed Velma, her dad, and his waitress girlfriend to get to the hospital they couldn't get to until the cars had been moved, and Velma compliments herself in this scene.
I was pretty great today, wasn't I? Possibly the greatest woman of all time.
As she does this at the expense of other women.
Even better than that girl with a ponytail that's on the quarter. No, it's just that after yesterday, I have no clue how to be a woman in a way that doesn't judge other women. Girls, let's do our respective yet equally valid things.
Yeah, that thing about losses on investment, it's that again. Fred turns up with some flowers and explains the feminist mystique has opened his eyes to her inner beauty, and Velma rejects him because he doesn't have any inner beauty. What even is the fucking point of this show? So Fred is portrayed first as a handsome but tiny-dicked, sometimes stupid misogynistic cunt, leading Velma to give him a book in the faint hope that he might read it and change and learn and cease to be a handsome but tiny-dicked, sometimes stupid misogynistic cunt. And when he turns up having had his mind broken by feminist literature and appreciating her inner beauty instead, thus no longer being a handsome but tiny-dicked, sometimes stupid misogynistic cunt, Velma rejects him because he is, still, a handsome but tiny dicked, sometimes stupid, misogynistic. Why? Just why do any of this? What was the reason for this character arc, besides getting the jock guy to fall in love with with Velma? Our mid-credits scene features the girl people for some reason thought was going to be called Scooby, but is in fact called Gigi, who did take meaning from Velma's lessons in not being hot, and so is now comfortable being herself. She bumps into Not Shaggy on her way out of the bathroom, giving us another weird, possible, probably but maybe not doomed to be aborted relationship to keep track of. Velma and Daphne, Daphne and Fred, Fred and Velma, Not Shaggy and Velma, Not Shaggy and Gigi. At the current rate, by the end of this season, we'll have added Not Shaggy and Fred, Velma and Gigi, Daphne and Gigi, Daphne and Not Shaggy, Gigi and Fred, and the chief of police with a harem of underage schoolgirls. Anyway, that's it for episodes 3 and 4. 3 has been comfortably the best of the lot so far. 4 has been the most shamelessly hypocritical in its messaging. On the odd occasion, it could decide what its messaging actually was. I don't think either have quite elicited the surely it can't be this bad shock of the first two, but, well, with the exception of episode 3, that's not really down to any measurable improvement in the writing, but more due to a dulling of the senses. Velma is a show that actively discourages you from engaging with it in any way. We should probably be thankful it releases in 2-episode drops, for no apparent reason, because at least it means this will all be over inside 3 weeks. At least until the second season that I'm told my hate watching is largely responsible for, but yeah, we'll see. Not sure I'm gonna come back to this one, it depends. Maybe HBO will try and take this video down as well. If they do, I'll be back.
2 weeks later.
And yet it somehow got even worse.
There's a difficult question to answer when it comes to covering Velma. Am I sitting here now with 6 episodes of this peculiar travesty to watch back to back, the abuser, or am I the abused? Is Velma doing more damage to me than I am doing to it? I've had plenty of people implore me not to finish off the series. These lovely well-wishers are very concerned about my mental health, and I appreciate that. But by the same token, I've had many more people demand that I do finish off the series. These people do not care about my mental health, and I appreciate that as well. I am apparently both a sadist and a masochist, so pick up your lube and your barbed wire dildo and let's see who's sitting comfortably once all this is over. As best I can recall, we left the show with Fred having been exonerated after another schoolgirl was murdered while he was in prison. The plot, such as it is nominally about uncovering the mysterious serial killer who goes around offing all the girls the show keeps telling us are hot, while carefully skirting around the fact that they're all about 15 years old. Velma gives him feminist literature in a bit to change him, which of course drives him completely mad, only then to reject him when he turns up having been duly changed in the desirable ways by the feminist literature. Velma, of course, has the hots for both Fred and Daphne, and because Velma is fundamentally a self-insert character, they also have the hots for her. The only unrequited hots are between Velma and Not Shaggy, because Not Shaggy is not shaggable enough to be worth her time. That bit of wordplay is funnier than anything in the show, and it's not even that funny. That Velma is far and away the least attractive person on the planet is, of course, mentioned. Half the show's alleged jokes have to do with Velma's profound fugliness, but because the show has about the same regard for the rules of narrative comedy as Bill Clinton had for... as I was saying, it doesn't actually impact her relationships in any way. She is afforded the chance to pick and choose her love interests despite her being, well, this. The frankly horrific dancing naked pregnant lady scene from episode 1 has its payoff, with the birth of Velma's stepsister, which may or may not be relevant to proceedings. Daphne, meanwhile, is on the hunt for her biological parents because she isn't satisfied being reared by her adoptive lesbo-cop mums, and Not Shaggy has bumped into some random called Gigi and instantly fallen in love with her. Now you might be thinking, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of actual plot contained within that brief summary, and you would be absolutely right to think that, because there's really not an awful lot of actual plot to talk about. It's mostly padding. Pop culture jokes that don't actually reference pop culture, repeated gags about Fred's dick and how it's too small to gag on in the first place, that's another joke you won't find in the show, episodic bouts of aggression toward white people, occasional lessons in feminism, bouts of furtive lesbianism that, to be honest, are far and away the show's most endearing aspect. In fact, the only thing Velma has less of than plot is comedy. But anyway, we have many episodes to cover, and not much time in which to do it. We are very shortly to get cracking. As if to emphasize the points I've just made, Episode 5's plot recap, which you'd think would have picked the best and funniest moments from Episode 4, closes with this little skit.
I feel like all the answers to my questions about my parents are in there.
The bathrooms?
Wait, I mean in there.
Which wasn't funny then, isn't funny now, and is probably still one of the better jokes in the show so far. We're reminded at the beginning that Velma has hallucinations and wants to, run at Daphne with a pair of scissors, but at least this constitutes the show remembering something about itself, because it very quickly proceeds to forget everything again. Velma's dad is going away for the night, and Velma complains that he's leaving her all alone while there's a murderer on the loose. She informs us that she was voted most likely to be murdered before all this, which, if I suddenly lost all self-respect and became cinema sins, would constitute 2 sins. In the first place, we've already done the "I was voted most likely to" joke. We did it quite recently, in fact.
People only think you murdered Brenda because you...
We're voted most revengey in the school yearbook. I know.
In the second place, Velma already knows, but has apparently forgotten, what the murderer's MO is. We know what the murderer's MO is because the entirety of the last episode was about that. In that episode, it was determined that the murderer was only targeting attractive, not to mention underage girls. Velma was tasked with writing a list of the hottest girls in the school in order that pervy police chief might give them a security detail. The show actually made a point to tell us that Velma was in no danger because she isn't hot.
That's a very insensitive thing to say. I mean, especially from a student who is in no danger from a hot girl murderer.
If you are going to junk the established mechanics of your show in order to cram a joke in, it had better be a very good joke.
Even though I was voted most likely to be murdered before any of this?
That is not a very good joke. That isn't even a good joke. I'm not actually sure it rises to the level of joke. Despite everyone being very aware that there's a serial killer on the loose, the school has not thought it prudent to cancel the marching band sleepover that doubtless serves as this episode's contrived premise. We then, sit down for this one, we then get something that actually resembles a joke.
Good morning, students. This is Principal Rogers. I'm here with Mayor Dave and the Sheriff.
Everybody, listen up. We just learned someone somewhere is being intolerant.
That kind of works. I mean, it's lazy as hell. It's really just a throwaway little skit, but it does actually resemble something we might call comedy, meaning episode 5 is off to a terrific start by the standards of this show. A joke that almost works. I bet it can't keep this up. It then decides it does remember the hotness mechanic from the previous episode, but only in order to dispense with it. The sheriff informs the school that the police detail has resigned because they keep getting sexually harassed by the probably underage girls, meaning a curfew has been instituted instead, resulting in the cancellation of that marching band sleepover I thought would be the contrived premise for this episode. I still think that will be the contrived premise for this episode, not least because the episode is actually titled Marching Band Sleepover, though given the show is dispatched with pretty much every other rule of writing, I suppose it's quite possible naming conventions have been murdered as well. It's now Daphne's turn to forget what happened 5 minutes ago. You might recall, but if you've got any sense, you won't, that she abandoned the search for her parents at the Crystal Caves in the last episode because Not Shaggy refused to go in with her, and her shtick at that precise moment was dumb popular girl. She abandoned the search because she was afraid whoever might be inside the caves would think her unpopular if she went in alone. Now, though, she's going back to the caves alone to resume the search. The show has occasionally decided to do not terrible things with Daphne in the past. I said in the last video that the on-off lesbian relationship with Velma, being the only non-cruel bit of characterization in the show, was almost tolerable. But as I also pointed out in that video, the show's approach to characterization is that everyone has multiple, disconnected dimensions, but only ever one dimension at a time, meaning the show positively discourages any kind of investment in it because that investment will never go anywhere. And here we are again. Daphne's been the superficial, popular, dumb bitch, then the independent but surprisingly heartfelt, vulnerable girl, then the dumb, superficial, popular bitch, and now she's back to being the independent-minded, intrepid explorer girl type thing. Yeah. That's what the narrative demands. It's just that the narrative demands that the characterization be about as confused as Ezra Miller on a bender, meaning this Daphne is simply not the same person as the Daphne who came to the caves in the last episode because comedy, really? That's about the extent of the explanation I can come up with. There's a warning notice over the entrance to the caves, which occasions this attempt at humor.
Sorry, sign, but hot people are cut too much slack to heed warnings.
Attacking quote-unquote hot people is one of this show's favorite pastimes. It's one of its very small number of bits. Meta pop culture, tiny-dicked white guy, hallucinations, hot people suck. The problem when you have such a small repertoire and so many episodes to fill is that you tend to have to shoehorn in these jokes far too often and in all the wrong places. It's barefacedly cheap, forced, contrived, A bit like making 3 videos about a show everyone knows is absolute dog shit when you could be outside doing something else. Oh fuck, that's a meta joke. I've been infected by Velma. Somebody call the clinic. Daphne gets yanked inside by some unseen foe and we're back to the school, where Fred is still trying to impress Velma with feminism. Because he's inexplicably in love with Velma now, he is trying to help her out by being a male feminist, which, to give it its due, the show does a serviceable job putting down.
Look, I'm glad reading the feminine mystique caused a little growth.
Shush, a feminist is speaking.
Dr. Edna Purdue was a female neurologist.
You don't need to say female, Velma. You can just say neurologist.
Ah!
Apparently one of the few things feminists and not feminists can agree on is that male feminists are some of the most insufferably embarrassing people on the planet and ought ready to be sent to the gulag. But he also tries to help by pushing the plot along. It turns out his house was once owned by a mad scientist, which is relevant for reasons we'll come onto, and this means we have to go find Not Shaggy, which I guess is also relevant for reasons we might come onto, though in this case we might not, who knows. Gigi and Not Shaggy don't want to help, however. Daphne, meanwhile, meets a couple of people disguised as what I think these are the Slag brothers, aren't they, who claim to be her parents. They claim that they never abandoned her, as was her origin story, rather she was taken from them by the lesbo cops, and then they disappear. How very mysterious. Fred and Velma go to an historical society looking for records left by the mad scientist, only to discover that Velma's mum has taken them for reasons unknown, which inevitably, but at least consistently, triggers another hallucination in Velma. The established mechanic by which she's broken out of these is that somebody makes her laugh, but when she asks Fred to make her laugh, he refuses on the grounds that he's too obsessed thinking about the gender fucking pay gap.
I would, but all I can think of right now is the gender pay gap. Is it funny? Women make 20% less than men, and women of color even less? I can't stop laughing.
Which I guess means we can sympathize with Velma in that not only has Fred failed to make her laugh, he's failed to make us laugh as well. I genuinely don't know what the show was even trying to achieve with this one. It's quite often impossible to tell when it's trying to be genuine and when it's being knowingly disingenuous. I know it does try to be genuine from time to time, such as Velma's astoundingly hypocritical spiel in the last episode about patriarchy, body shaming women and all the rest of it. Astoundingly hypocritical, given it's voiced by a character who does nothing except body-shaming Fred and his tiny penis. Which leads me to believe that it is trying to be genuine here as well. You don't typically go from preaching feminist dogma to ridiculing it and then back again, unless you are yourself a bit fucking mental. But this little bit doesn't even really qualify as the kind of applause comedy that constitutes the bulk of quote-unquote progressive and especially feminist humor. You know, the impassioned rant sprinkled with the odd pseudo-edgy joke that the audience is really supposed to nod along and clap to, not laugh with. There absolutely are ways to make invoking the gender pay gap funny. In fact, it quite often is funny just by being invoked, because it bears absolutely no resemblance to reality, and is only trotted out by people who have no fundamental attachment to reality. The gender pay gap doesn't exist. It's been invented by a bunch of metropolitan professional women who take too much time off and think other people are to blame for it. But again, the show typically espouses this mindset. It doesn't usually make it the target of a joke. So here, when it's placed in lieu of a joke, taking up the space where a joke should be, well, it just renders the whole thing clunky and awkward and generally awful, and I have no idea what it's trying to do. As if to prove that point, Velma does earnest feminism in the very next scene.
Still, if I can separate reality dating shows' exploitation of women from my obsessive need to watch them, I can separate Gigi from Norville.
The context, by the way, is that she's decided she needs to break Not Shaggy away from Gigi so he can help her again. Say, remember how I predicted the episode would still find a way to contrive that marching band sleepover into being its premise? Well, to nobody's surprise whatsoever, I was right. Velma somehow reasons that hosting the marching band sleepover at her house and having Not Shaggy come along will aid her in her quest to ruin his relationship. Say, remember how this show is supposed to be about tracking down, finding and unmasking a serial killer? No? Well, I mean, I don't really blame you. It is truly impressive how Velma manages to do anything except follow its A plot. Deviations are perfectly acceptable in theory, though I think the sheer number of them in this show would probably make even a brilliant writer seem intolerable, but they do actually need to serve a purpose, have a reason to be, accomplish something in aid of the story as a whole or the characters within it. Velma's many distractions do none of that. I think we've spent 15 times longer piddling about with appalling relationship drama than we've actually spent engaging with the mainline story. Speaking of mind-numbingly tedious distractions, Daphne gives us a history of the Crystal Cave mines attraction and the gang of ex-employees who live there, from whom she is apparently descended. I don't give a damn. I really don't. She goes to tell Velma, who doesn't give a damn about it either, because, as you might recall, they're madly in love, as the show took care to remind us literally 13 minutes ago at the beginning of the episode. But never the fuck mind, I guess. We can't remember that yet because that would be inconvenient to the comedy. Gigi and Velma have a flute off, yes, to see who gets to win not Shaggy. Daphne confronts the lesbo cops about why they stole her origin story from Superman. I guess it's a reference that actually references something, so that's actually an improvement. Via an exchange I'm not going to waste anybody's time by recounting, Velma learns that the mad scientist she's been looking for is actually not Shaggy's grandmother. To prolong the torment, we then get another side quest as Velma manipulates not Shaggy into stealing a cop car to go to a restaurant to pick up food for the band nerds who are hungry, so hungry that they are currently eating her house, because comedy. The cop car opens a sewer grate which interests Daphne, who, in an apt metaphor for this show as a whole, is about to dive into a river full of liquid shit. Velma herself has a moment of character development in realizing that she's a horrible person and not Shaggy is a better friend than she is. So she decides to sacrifice herself to distract the cops so her friends can escape with the food, even though the whole point of them stealing a cop car earlier to begin with was that it would allow them to escape the attention of the cops, but who cares? The last time that Velma had character development was, I think, her realizing her feelings for Daphne, which has been temporarily forgotten about in this episode because she's now not giving a flying shit about Daphne and her feelings because she's too focused on herself. The time before that was when she realized that her mother had left because she'd been horrible to her and not because of some mystery kidnapping, which of course was completely retconned by the end of that same episode, as Velma decided that actually it was a mystery kidnapping after all, and her being a cunt had nothing to do with her mother's disappearance. Following which pattern, this moment of realization, that she's a horrible person and her friends are better friends than she is, will, I'm sure, be operative for, 10 minutes? Before that too is retconned and her character resets with no acknowledgement that the arc has been aborted. Apparently you can get paid lots of money by HBO to write this shit. It turns out not Shaggy's mum was also picked up for breaking curfew, and upon leaving prison the morning after, she promises Velma that she'll tell her everything she needs to know about her mother, the mad scientist woman. She had absolutely no involvement in the plot until this moment. She's never been aware of Velma's interest in her mother. She has no incentive to tell Velma all these things she didn't know she wanted to know, which makes the entirety of the proceeding completely fucking pointless. All that wasted time, all that wasted money on a mystery-solving episode that had its mystery solved at the end by a character who wasn't at all involved in the attempt to solve it because comedy. The entire plot hinged on Velma taking a selfie of the school principal. The entire plot consisted of 3 scenes amounting to perhaps 20 seconds. Velma discovers mad scientist, Velma takes selfie of principal, principal promises to reveal information to stop Velma posting selfie online. Everything else in this episode, all 25 minutes of it, was side quest and filler. Perhaps one day in the far distant future, Velma will be remembered for heralding the dawn of an entirely new literary style, anti-writing, the point of which is to string the audience along with a seemingly interminable collection of bad jokes, bad humor, bad characters, bad plot, only to then render the whole thing a soul-crushing waste of time, if it wasn't already, by having the payoff make everything redundant. Daphne goes back to the caves. There she meets the Slag brothers again, one of whom is the prisoner I think Fred was bunking with in jail in an earlier episode. They claim that they are her parents, that they might be, they might not be, I don't care, and on we go to episode 6. Episode 6 is nominally about how shit parents are. You can tell that because the title tells you that's what it's nominally about. But given this is Velma, we can be pretty sure that it's going to feature for about 3 minutes of the 24-minute runtime, and the rest will be, exactly what you'd expect of Velma. Velma goes to speak to the principal about her mad scientist mother, while not Shaggy accompanies her to ensure she doesn't hallucinate. The school principal explains that her mad scientist mother had found a way to keep the human brain alive outside the body. This could, for all I know, be the true story behind the making of this show, which has apparently been written by the body from which the brain was extracted after said extraction. That is a meta comment. The in-universe observation is, of course, that all the murdered girls have had their brains removed. We remember this because the show made a joke about it once.
She has no brain! Oh, I am not dissing her. She has no brain!
Comedy. Now then, the show does actually achieve something with this little bit of backstory. What it achieves is the most convoluted, longest build-up to a shit pun ever devised for the screen. Ready for it? here we go. Back in the 1960s, some evil army man was pissed off by some hippies. Fair enough, I sympathize. Meddling kids, as the show repeatedly calls them. He tried infiltrating them via various silly means, but he always failed. But then, he heard about mad scientists' brain experiments, and he thought to himself, would it be possible to place the brains of soldiers inside these hippies? I mean, these meddling kids. He approached mad scientist with a plan. That plan was called the Special Covert Operations Brain Initiative, which reads as Scooby. Yes, but hold on a minute, that's not actually the punchline. I hope you've got an empty bladder for this one, because really, you're going to piss yourselves laughing. It's really that good. Having heard this explanation, Velma asks the school principal,
Scooby? And wait, what did Scooby do?
They said fucking Scooby-Doo, guys. They did a pun. It only took them 4 minutes and 24 seconds. Honestly, I think we could just end this video here. I don't think we can beat that. I feel like we've kind of completed the show now. There's nothing to be gained by continuing. Yep, well, that's a wrap then. See you next time. Except of course it's not. And we haven't even reached the bit where Velma twerks over a corpse yet, so no, actually, we've got a long way to go. The Scooby plan failed, and Mad Scientist went mad and was placed in the insane asylum. The show then does what is quite possibly the most random disconnected white people joke of all the random disconnected white people jokes it's done so far.
I mean, playing God, removing brains, that's some white people shit.
She was always a trailblazer.
There are no words. Let's just park that one and move on. Velma makes the connection I made ages ago and links the various torn threads of this plot into something vaguely resembling a plot. The disappearances and the murders are all linked, you see. But because that would seem to have given us a very obvious place to very efficiently go next in order to keep the story moving, that particular orgasm has to be ruined by a cutaway to Daphne in the Crystal Caves, where it turns out the gang she thinks are her parents have some super secret ulterior motive for inviting her into their inner sanctum that she is not allowed to know yet. And because that would seem to have given us a very obvious place to very efficiently go next in order to keep this story moving, that particular orgasm has to be ruined by a cutaway to Velma, who's been revived from a hallucination induced by an almost revelation in the previous scene. Now, I've praised the hallucinations before, and by praised I mean I've pointed out that the show has deployed them consistently, which bare minimum standard has otherwise been entirely beyond its writers. Unfortunately though, the show has just as consistently proven itself able to ruin good things. And so this serviceable mechanic has somehow been leveraged against the plot of the show, because the school principal is now refusing to tell Velma anything more about the mystery until she's overcome her hallucinations. I believe this is what Captain Tonal Loke would call an artificial barrier of blockage. The show has used its one consistent mechanic to actually halt plot progression, thereby ensuring that we have to waste, one would assume, at least the rest of this episode on nonsensical garbage. Because comedy. Velma decides that the only way around this is to get to the bottom of her hallucinations. You know, just like she did way back in episode 1 before she retconned that. You might point out that she already knows at least 2 ways to overcome her hallucinations, not Shaggy making her laugh, which won't work anymore because he's in love with Gigi, not her, and Daphne kissing her. The quickest, easiest, and simplest solution in her mind should be, I need to find Daphne, which would dovetail with the recent reminder at the beginning of the episode that she's still in love with her, and here comes the scissoring joke again.
Scissor me timbers!
But because that would make sense, and feasibly allow the story to move along a bit and actually be in keeping with an established character relationship and goal set, no. No, we have to go back in time to the origin of her hallucinations again, just like we did in episode 1 with a flashback. Not Shaggy theorizes that it wasn't actually her mother's mysterious disappearance that caused the hallucinations, because she'd actually been searching for her mother before the hallucinations ever started. A fairly important piece of information you'd think might have been trailed in the show before now, but this is Velma, so no. Not Shaggy is a man though, so of course he can't be allowed to actually theorize a solution to this quandary. He simply raises this point of information in order that Velma be able to do what Velma always does and solve everything herself. By the way, you might recall that a substantial part of an earlier episode involved Not Shaggy learning to become a therapist with the aid of his therapist dad's magic cardigan. Were this show actually interested in, itself, or its plot, or its characters, this might have been a moment to revisit that. Have Not Shaggy use that cardigan and or those skills again to bring out something from Velma's subconscious that she's too embarrassed to admit to herself. You could even keep the daddy issues joke if you really wanted to, but you'd then have baked it into the show in a way that actually makes use of a previous episode's otherwise entirely redundant subplot. So she hypothesizes that, in fact, the real cause of her hallucinations is that she has always wanted her dad to love her, and that the hallucinations are her subconscious prohibiting her search for her mother, because reminding her dad that her mother left them would make it harder for him to love her. Which is a very long and convoluted way of saying,
Wait, oh no. I hallucinate because I have daddy issues. Gross.
So she goes to chat with her dad. Meanwhile, in the Crystal Caves, we learn that the Crystal Cave gang are mining crystals because their plan is to sell them to idiot spiritualists and millennials who believe in crystal healing in order to fund their escape to Angola. I didn't make that up, I might as well have done. Velma attempts to make her dad love her over a lunch at a strip club, but once again, we can't have a quick resolution. This trauma has to be prolonged. So that conversation goes nowhere at first, and we're instead treated to a long segment where Fred's dad takes him to the strip club in a bid to make him stop being in love with Velma, which culminates in Velma, 15 years old, remember, doing a pole dance in a bid to get her dad's attention. Because this episode's meta is daddy issues, and there are literally no depths the show will not plunder in order to get this across. God, well, I suppose if there's one thing to be said in the show's favor, is that it only dwelt on a 15-year-old pole dancing for her dad for like a few minutes. That's the level we're on. Honestly, I could be reviewing MILF Manor and it'd probably be marginally more edifying than this. Thankfully, we get to move on from that with a montage of parent-sibling relations. Velma's dad tries to learn how to be a good father, Fred's dad continues trying to make Fred be a man, Shaggy learns not to be a beta male by observing his pathetic father and resolving to do the opposite. By the way, that label, beta male, was pinned on him by Velma, who, you might remember, had a moment of character progression in the previous episode where she realized she was a cunt and needed to be a better friend. Remember how I predicted that would be retconned just like every other moment of character development in the show? I'm not saying that because I expect applause for it, by the way, but because I'm stuck with certain conventions. Ordinarily, prediction takes at least a little bit of analysis and cognitive application. It doesn't with Velma. Velma's just awful, and it's awful so often and in so many of the same ways that you can see its awfulness coming several episodes in advance. But at least if I act as if I'm critiquing a serious piece of media, there's a chance I can delude myself into thinking this is a fruitful use of my limited time on this planet. The montage actually isn't that terrible an occurrence, by the way. It semi-competently makes the "they fuck you up your mum and dad" point that this episode sometimes remembers is its reason for being. The fact we only got here because of a 15-year-old girl pole dancing for her own father is best pushed out of your mind as far as possible, as quickly as possible. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Happily, or not, it actually wasn't required for any of the subsequent events to make sense. It was just redundant debauchery. It's the best kind of debauchery, honest. It turns out Velma's dad wasn't really that interested in her though. He was just feigning interest as a ruse to get him out of paternity leave and back to work. This irritates Velma, but it does also convince her that she doesn't want her dad's love after all, meaning that she won't hallucinate anymore, thus allowing the plot to move forward again. She believes she's overcome that artificial barrier of blockage behind which this entire pointless episode was piling up, and she's right. So here we go with another exposition dump, which is what always happens. All plot progression in this show is squeezed into little 30-second windows, usually around the close of the second third of each episode. The rest is entirely pointless. By the end of this, there's probably a very quick and easy supercut to be made splicing these segments together. The entire A plot of Velma exposited inside 5 minutes. The funniest thing about this entire show would be if that supercut proved to be actually quite compelling. Mad Scientist Woman's secret lab is underneath Fred's house, which Velma's mum found out about, leading Velma off to the secret lab in a bid to learn more. Back in the caves, that ulterior motive possessed by Daphne's supposed parents, that nobody really gave a damn about anyway, turns out to be that they want to use her as a hostage in the event her adoptive lesbo-cop mums show up to stop them. Adoptive lesbo-cop mums show up and stop them, so that worked well. Velma turns up at Fred's, and he agrees to help her in a bid to stand up to his father. But the basement is still bricked up, suggesting, at least seemingly, that Velma's mother never went in there to begin with. But Fred still tries to open the brick door and it collapses on them. Meanwhile, Daphne realizes that her real parents really were dickheads who abandoned her twice. Her lesbo-cop mums are alright, actually. This one might, in fact, be relevant later, so alone of all the pieces of information we've had so far, it's probably worth keeping it to one side. Back at Fred's house, Velma's dad improbably appears in the basement and rescues Velma from underneath the rubble. They go down into the basement, she finds a piece of paper with Jinkies written on it in her mother's handwriting, meaning her mum was there after all. She hallucinates, but her dad says he believes her now about the mother's disappearance, so the hallucination goes away. In the mid-credit scene, Daphne's escaping birth mother gets accosted and presumably murdered by the serial killer in a mask. That's the end. Joking aside, that episode had an overarching message that was neither cheap nor disgusting, which is a surprise, because this is an episode of Velma. Adopting the standard used by defenders of, for example, Avatar: The Way of Water, it had a good theme, which makes it not woke and therefore good. I did a big old video on that, by the way. You should go watch it after this one. It's actually serious media criticism as opposed to whatever the fuck this is. Flogging the mentally ill, maybe? Had I watched this episode before doing that review, though, it would have been a brilliant example of why themes alone do not make for good movies and television. Because I can't help but recall that in service of what is genuinely quite a nice theme of family, we just had a huge amount of tedious contrived nonsense, culminating in a 15-year-old pole dancing to get her dad's attention. Yeah, I know we said we'd move on from that as quickly as possible. I had to mention it one more time because it really happened, and it's, yeah, okay, maybe now's the time. We're just gonna move on now. The episode also remembered one of Daphne's through lines, fear of abandonment, with the realization that the birth parent she'd been hankering after had actually abandoned her after all, and her lesbo-cop mums are actually much better for and to her. Unusually for this show, this characterization will actually be built on in an episode or two, in a way that isn't terrible and so deserves mentioning now because of how unusually good it is. Episode 7 then, that begins on an optimistic note. Velma informs us that now her hallucinations are over, she can dedicate herself entirely to solving the mystery of her mother's disappearance, from which you might assume that this is the meaty part of the show, the part where it puts away its childish things and actually gets on with the goddamn plot for a change. You might well assume that. You would be wrong to assume it, but you might. Velma tells us how she went back through all her mum's old manuscripts looking for clues, which is the kind of thing you'd think she might have done before now. Hallucinations might have stopped her doing it directly, but are we really going to believe that she never asked Not Shaggy to read them for her? He's been her errand boy since episode 1. He's been shown doing exactly this kind of thing. Not that it makes any difference because the notes leave her no clues, nor do any of the other leads she pursues. All the while, we're shown her ignoring Daphne's attempts to get in touch with her, suggesting we're probably going back over the abandonment motif in short order. That's not necessarily a bad thing. These two are the only two characters with what might be described as an actual relationship, and I think you can already see how Daphne's realization at the close of the previous episode might pay forward to further character development later. But it does, once again, somewhat jar with Velma's earlier realization that she's a piece of shit and a bad friend, a lesson that, in the event, was forgotten in far less time than it took her to learn it. The episode proper begins when she returns home to find that her dad's girlfriend, the dancing pregnant lady who recently became a mother, has been murdered. She's lying there on the floor covered in blood. We know Velma doesn't give a shit about her, or indeed about anybody else, but this is her dad's girlfriend. They've just had a kid together. And his reaction? Oh no! Oh look, a mystery. He doesn't actually give a shit. Which, again, absent characterization, isn't rescued by the revelation that it was all a hoax setting up this episode's contrived premise. Because he didn't know it was a hoax at the time, and still he didn't give a shit. The show's been trying to make out that there has been trouble and strife in this relationship since the new kid arrived, lots of stress and such. But apparently that was only a thing because the plot of the last episode demanded it be so, and because the plot of this episode doesn't, it's no longer a thing. But it's a blatant missed opportunity, as with everything else in the show, admittedly, because you could have spun some kind of joke out of that. Say she gets up and reveals it was a hoax, but she's incredibly pissed off that he didn't seem to care that she was dead. I mean, that's just basic setup and payoff, a single, simple little joke, a little bit of character work builds on something established in the previous episode. Is that too much to ask, show? Well, yeah, it is, and to be honest, we've known this for weeks, but, keeping up appearances. So, we recently had the band camp sleepover as the contrived scene-setting device. In this episode, it's something called Fog Fest, which, I could describe, but what's the point? It's a festival, it takes place in some fog. Velma for once asks a salient question. How can this still be going on, given the serial killer and the curfew and such? It's a salient question, which is what makes it a dangerous question, because she's essentially pointing out that the writers don't have a clue what they're doing. Her father, though, he explains that it's all fine, the crisis is over now, because the murders have officially been pegged on the ghost of Mad Science Lady, so everything's back to normal. Because comedy. To add more nonsense to an already dumb premise, and to dispense entirely with whatever fanciful notions we might have taken from Velma saying she was going to get on with the plot, Waitress Wife explains that girls won't be allowed to enter Fogfest unless they have a date, someone who can keep them safe. I played a game in the last video. Guess the missing word. I made it easy that time though because I gave you options like lizard, idiot, or white person, and this is Velma, so the answer was obviously going to be white person. Let's make it though a little bit more challenging. If I tell you that Velma complains about the date rule, what is the substance of her complaint? Is it A, white people, B, sexism, or C, a meta pop culture reference? They're all equally plausible, because they also happen to be the only plausible options in the show, because it has all the comedic range of Eleanor Roosevelt's corpseified sphincter, but the answer in this case is B, sexism. That's right. Much like in the self-defense episode, a very sensible and proven to be effective protective measure is instantly dismissed as an assault on the fairer sex, because nothing says an assault on women's integrity like protecting women from assault. By the way, one of the surest tells that these episodes are all written by different people is the extent to which Velma's feminism manifests itself and which wave of feminism manifests itself. Episodes where it's merely there anecdotally tend to be written by one writer or team of writers, but episodes where it forms the bulk of her characterization in a particularly vindictive way, they, I'm pretty sure, are written by a different writer. The last time she was egregiously feministic, it gave us that staggeringly hypocritical body-shaming rant. This episode is going to go on to do something very similar. None of the intervening episodes, though, did, suggesting that these two episodes, the body-shaming one and this one, which have a tone that I think we'll call she-hulky, they might have been written by the same person. Oh look, I was right! Fred intends to invite Velma to the Fogfest thing, which irritates his parents. It irritates his parents because their company is sponsoring Fogfest, and so he has to win Fogfest King in order to prove that he and they and his company are all the best, because the best is what the company sells. A very cheap joke that is still miles better than anything in this show is that it seems already to have lost the plot in all this fog it keeps banging on about, but that doesn't work, sadly, because the show lost its plot well before the fog was introduced. So Fred can't date Velma, because if he does, he'll lose the competition. Meanwhile, more fucking relationship nonsense. Gigi is upset that Not Shaggy has been ignoring her. Oh no! But then he turns up and invites her to Fogfest. I don't think there was ever much appetite for a Scooby-Doo spin-off show that doesn't, feature Scooby-Doo and in which all the characters have been completely transformed into the worst imaginable versions of themselves, but if there were any appetite for that kind of thing, I'm morally certain it would have evaporated had you told the audience, and instead of a story, we're just gonna have them all try and, fuck each other in various combinations for 10 episodes. The words Scooby-Doo relationship drama have not, to my knowledge, ever been used in that order by any sentient English-speaking person, for the simple reason that nobody would ever think to put them together because it has no utility whatever. The concept is a non-starter, but then, along comes HBO Max. There's also a strong lockdown vibe coming from the show, having Velma repeatedly express her frustration that the town isn't willing to stay inside just to stop a serial killer, because they're all selfish and they want to party.
What I don't understand is how it can still be happening with the serial killer on the loose. What happened to curfew? It was working.
I would sort of overlook this, but it's not just one throwaway line, it's a repeated line, and it's delivered as though the writer does have some sort of gripe they're trying to convey. It might be me reading too much into it. It might be I'm just so desperate for content of any description that I'm now creating a headcanon in which the show actually tries to convey a serious and consistent point. I mean, hell, I was desperate enough to do anything except focus on the show itself that I did go looking to see if the writer had mentioned anything about lockdowns before. I did it for like 5 minutes, this is all I turned up, but you can make of that what you will. But yeah, fuck it, the longer I delay, the longer this will take. Velma tries to get Daphne to go with her, but Fred turns up and bribes her into going with him, leaving Velma all alone, which would be sad, and which would invite sympathy, were it not exactly what she fucking deserves, because she is a horrible person. Like the show pointed out to us recently in having her commit to change it, before it had forgotten that it pointed it out by having her commit to changing it. Via one nonsensical leap or another, Velma realizes if she holds the Jinkies note up to a light, it'll reveal a phone number which she calls, and uses the background noise to work out that the serial killer is at Fogfest. Silly Velma, you could have figured that out ages ago if you'd been paying attention to the writing in the show you're in. So she dresses up as a man and tries to sneak her way into Fogfest. The police officer tells her there's something funny about the way she's dressed. This, specifically, is what he says.
There's something funny about you. Not LOL funny, but more thoughtful and well-observed, like a female-driven comedy.
Well, and props to the writer, I guess, for recognizing that nobody laughs out loud at quote-unquote female-driven comedies, but I'm afraid I really can't let thoughtful and well-observed female-driven comedy slide. This show is its own disproof. We live in a world where female-driven comedy is represented chiefly by the likes of Amy Schumer, Kathy Griffin, and Hannah Gadsby. The most recent female-led comedy on TV that entered my crosshairs was She-Hulk. There actually are funny women in the world, but trying to find them in the domain of studio-backed female-driven comedies is like blinding yourself with acid and hunting for a shiny Venusaur in the smoking ruins of the world's biggest Walmart. It's still a more pleasurable experience than watching Velma, but it's not easy. So she punches him in the balls, and this is fine. You absolutely can get away with that. I frequently kick policemen in the nads, and I've never been arrested for it either. Not Shaggy Schmooze's Gigi. Fred tries to bribe people into voting for him to be Fog King. Velma falls off a high structure and disappointingly doesn't die. And then, because she's Velma, all the hot girls start falling for her in her male disguise. Whoever could have predicted such a thing? They include Drunk Daphne. I'm not especially prudish, by the way, about depicting probable minors drinking, not least because I'm British, which means A, we don't call them minors, and B, it's tacitly accepted over here that you've been drinking since you were at least like 14 years old if you came from a good family, 3 if you came from Scotland. They go off and they have a dance. Velma does the worm. She realizes, while doing the worm, that when people think she's a guy, everyone praises her for her worst qualities.
Wait a second. As a guy, everyone thinks my worst qualities as a girl are awesome. No tap!
We're impressed.
Yeah.
Double standards, you guys. It's doing the double standards thing again. It's absolute horseshit, of course, though there actually is a double standard at play. That double standard is when trendy feminist writers deploy tricks like this to belittle an entire sex in a way they would absolutely despise were it to happen the other way around. You might almost call it toxic femininity. Sorry, I'm back from the re-education camp now. Hooray for Velma, calling out double standards in a fair and accurate and empowering way. Guys suck. Yay, vagina. Because men get praised for their worst qualities, apparently. Velma stands up and uses her masculine authority to tell people that ghosts aren't real. And the serial killer is still on the loose, which, I mean, well, she's right, isn't she? But the show wants us to think that the only reason people are listening to her now is because she's a man. People never listen to women in the same way, apparently, which is why nobody has ever heard of or been expected to respect Hillary Clinton, Jacinda Ardern, or Nicola Sturgeon because of the fact they have vaginas, and that overrides the fact that they are objectively shit politicians. And then it does that thing again.
Look, I know that as Americans we want to party, but curfew cannot end because the serial killer is still on the loose.
No, I'm just going to call this now. This is a lockdown allegory. The writer is from the Taylor Lorenz School of Wimpy Global Annihilation. My vulnerability is my identity. The world must stop until I feel safe. To be honest, the general tone and tenor and general moral decrepitness of this show means it would be very unsurprising if this was the messaging behind this episode. It's touched every other asinine belief of the fashionable idiot class. Why not this one as well? Man Velma is voted Fog King, leading to more of this.
Holy crap! No wonder men are so desperate to hold onto their power. This is the easiest shit ever. As a guy, I can do anything.
Highest suicide rate, lowest educational attainment rate, highest homelessness rate, highest overdose rate, highest incarceration rate, lowest success rate in custody battles, can be drafted, only class against whom discrimination is both acceptable and apparently championed. Look, I'm not an MRA, I think the men's rights movement is all kinds of cringe, but if you wonder why movements like that take off, you could do worse than begin by looking at the treatment of men in pop culture as written by affluent middle-class professional women. Hell, the woman who wrote this episode is complaining that talentless men get elevated way above their station and ability on the back of their worst qualities. The pot hasn't so much as met the kettle as it's met it, drugged it, kidnapped it, killed it, and dumped it in a ditch beside the nearest interstate. And just in case we missed this wanton parade of entitled ignorance, we get a little montage of Man Velma beating out poor women in competitions for jobs and prizes. Drunk Daphne and Man Velma meet up, and Drunk Daphne finally gets a chance to explain the story of her parents to someone. Man Velma again seems to acknowledge that she's been a shit friend, but we've seen that before, so we already know how that's going to pan out. And then Fred busts her disguise, and everyone hates her, and not Shaggy wins Fog King instead. Actual Velma bumps into Daphne again and explains she kept up the disguise because, and I quote,
But as a guy, there's so little consequence for your actions. I was like, I'd be an idiot not to at least try and go for it. Baba booey!
When you are a man, there are no consequences for your actions.
Ever feel like having that much power on your show has led to being a little unprofessional?
I think the temptation is there.
The temptation.
And I have succumbed to that temptation. We've had a lot of handsome actors on the show, but we had this one actor on the show named Lee Pace.
Picture, there he is. That's a good look. That's a very good looking guy, yeah.
Came on the show and we had to do this flashback sequence where we were in bed together in college. That in the middle of it, he was just supposed to be like, "What do you think, Mindy?" And I was like,
it's not that, see, you just went for it. You just started kissing that guy, that picture, yeah.
And then I walked backstage where we have two writer-producers, Ike Barinholtz and David Zassin, and they were like, "Hey man, what are you doing? You could be sued for that." And I got very scared, and then I said, "Tell anyone and you're fired."
I will simply say that this show is objectively one of the worst fictional creations ever, and its predominantly female writing team has been given a second season. So, yeah, funny that consequences thing, isn't it? They don't seem to apply to you guys either. Velma and Daphne have a heart-to-heart, then get accosted by a presumed serial killer. There follows an actual Scooby-Doo reference, which would have been appreciated had the rest of the episode not been so utterly fucking contemptible. Heart-to-heart between Not Shaggy and Gigi, yada yada yada, mid-credits scene sees Fred accosted by a serial killer, and we're on to episode 8. In another apt metaphor for this show, we've jumped 2 days after Fogfest and found Daphne and Velma at the bottom of a deep dark ravine, profoundly regretting the circumstances that brought them to this point. Frustratingly, this is something of a flashback episode, so we're then told we're going to see Daphne's flashback, and we've jumped 2 days back again. And in case that wasn't clear enough, Daphne's one dimension has reverted to its vehicle for meta joke state, and so she tells Velma,
"But wouldn't you agree that the strongest use of flashbacks on TV is when one character's flashback is intercut with another's to eventually combine in the present storyline?"
And it goes on.
Saying if this was a flashback in your point of view, in order for it to be earned, we'd have to cut to, I don't know, Fred?
And it goes on.
I like it when they use a title card with the character's name when they cut to a different flashback.
We're now with Fred. It's his flashback. He's been kidnapped. He's in a room with tanks containing the brains of the murdered girls, and they're talking to him. Then we're with Daphne again. And it goes on.
I still say it's more seamless without the title card.
And I still say my old job as a television executive makes me worry audiences won't be able to follow it.
They're trying to unlock the serial killer's phone, which they got in the last episode, and I forgot to mention it because I don't care. They succeed. They plan to go to a mountain or something to find the serial killer. Meanwhile, with Fred, one of the brains has the gall to call this show a playful reimagining, which is just a flat-out lie, brain. Velma turns up at Daphne's before they leave for the mountain. Daphne Rose Tico's it and says she can't come, because she and generic hot girl from a previous episode have to make a sexy calendar to fight discrimination against hot girls, because comedy again, I guess. The implication is there might be something more to this than we see, so Velma fakes an hallucination in a bid to break up another relationship. Not Shaggy and Gigi are also at the bottom of the deep dark hole, and because they're in this show, we get their flashbacks. They, it turns out, were planning to go to Gigi's cabin up by the same mountain. Meanwhile, Fred is flirting with a brain in a jar. There's absolutely no point covering the various exchanges and intervening flashbacks because they are what filler would consider to be unjustified filler. It's just more relationship bickering. We're more than halfway through the episode now, and so far what we've had is meta flashback commentary and, yeah, bickering. Mind you, at least when it's doing nothing, it's not being vile or especially painful. This might actually go down as one of the best of all the episodes, solely by virtue of the fact that absolutely nothing happens, and nothing even tries to happen. I did joke in my last video, by the way, about the exponentially expanding array of relationship combinations. Velma and Daphne, Daphne and Fred, Fred and Velma, Not Shaggy and Velma, Not Shaggy and Gigi. At the current rate, by the end of this season, we'll have added Not Shaggy and Fred, Velma and Gigi, Daphne and Gigi, Daphne and Not Shaggy, Gigi and Fred, and the chief of police with a harem of underage schoolgirls. I didn't expect to actually have to add Daphne and Gigi to the list, but this episode adds it to the list. Apparently, they used to have a thing. Happily though, they no longer have a thing. Daphne's thing is most definitely for Velma now, and again, inexplicable though it is, unjustified though it is, frequently forgotten by the writers as it is, if I had to pick one thing about this latest round of episodes to praise, it would have to be this again. The writers can do dialogue and meaningful exchanges when they want to. They can even construct a half-believable relationship with an actual dynamic and feeling element to it. Daphne explaining here that she's attached to Velma because Velma's jealousy amounts to a kind of obsessive protectiveness that she missed from her own lack of parents, paying off the realization in the last but one episode. That's genuinely not terrible as far as writing goes. It's a bit convoluted, though that's largely because they've had to cram it into about 10 seconds. But since we've had our allotted 10 seconds of non-abysmal content, it's back to the bickering. Via nonsense that I'm again not going to bother to explain, they end up falling further down the ravine and into the crystal caverns from however long ago. Not Shaggy and Gigi have exhausted their already exhausting role in the script, and so they leave Daphne and Velma alone in the caves. Fred is still flirting with Brains. It doesn't matter. Daphne and Velma decide they're too fucked up to be just friends, so it might be worth giving a proper relationship a go. Which, yeah, given the nonsense relationships I've been privileged to observe in real life, that might just be the show's only accurate meta joke. But they're interrupted then because they overhear Fred trying to explain to the Brains, just go with me on this, why he cheated on them with each other. They let Fred out, but he causes a cave-in because, stupid Fred, Velma falls down a crack, but her mum appears from nowhere and rescues her. That's what's called a reveal. It doesn't actually mean anything because we all hate this show and nobody's actually invested in its storyline, but it is functionally, technically, a reveal. They escape in a van that looks suspiciously like the Mystery Machine, doubtless to be saved for and ruined in the second season of the show that HBO has greenlit in some underhanded way to prove the Mayans right. Inconveniently, Velma's mum can't remember who kidnapped her, meaning it's probably her, isn't it? And with that devastating, heart-sinking feeling of inevitability, we crash into episode 9. On the plus side, we've nearly made it, just 2 episodes left. Episode 9 kicks off in hospital, where Velma's mum tells us she does indeed have amnesia. This is validated by Not Shaggy's therapist dad. You know, the one who had amazing magical powers for one scene because comedy, but is otherwise a target for the writer's contempt. Here is an allotted space for a witty one-liner from Velma, and because it's Velma, and we're all too familiar with it by now, I'm not even going to ask you what nonsensical put-down you think she'll deliver, because it's obviously going to be a white guy joke.
Hey, no offense, but can we just let the actual doctor explain? Just being a white guy with a clipboard doesn't cut it anymore.
Despite this, the actual doctor refuses to help because their insurance won't cover it. So it's left to therapist dad to explain the premise of the episode anyway, which is that they have just 72 hours to recover her mum's memories before the memories are gone forever. The key to recovering them is that her mum must be kept happy, which is very inconvenient because, for one thing, she doesn't know that her husband has a new girlfriend and a new kid. So Velma and co decide to try and hide this fact by turning their house back into the mess that it had been when her mum still lived there, pushing new girlfriend out of the door. Velma's mother's memories do begin to come back, but this new mechanic unfortunately gives the writers an opportunity to waste an entire episode's worth of time by having Velma do all manner of quirky little side quests to keep her mum happy, which would be bad enough, except that this waste of time isn't enough of a waste of time, and so the show also has a parallel set of side quests for Daphne, who has had her popularity stripped from her after she tried to leave the popular girl's brains behind in the Crystal Caves. Despite the show making a big thing several times about the difference between smart girls who have brains, and this being threatening to people generally and men in particular, and hot girls who have no brains and so enjoy unearned popularity, the show has, wait for it, forgotten all about it, even though it was the premise for, the first half of the season? So now, the hot girls' brains are the source of their popularity because that's what this torturous mess of a setup requires, because comedy. Both she and Fred had been exiled from the ranks of the popular kids for offending the brains. They have to earn their way back in. Velma's current side quest means that she needs to send Not Shaggy on a side quest to break into his school principal mum's office to forge her some new report cards to show that she's been doing well in school. I don't give a fuck. We get more mindless cruelty at Fred's expense. We get another side quest trying to find a reason for Waitress' girlfriend and her new kid that isn't that Velma's dad had an affair, so Velma pretends that the kid is hers and Not Shaggy is the father. This all triggers more memories in her mother about her breaking into the secret lab from however the fuck long ago, but which also, and less conveniently, triggers a long looking after baby sequence that is supposed to be funny, and of course it's Velma, so it isn't. And that also triggers a long Daphne and Fred need their popularity back, so pretend to date sequence, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I'm not going to subject myself, or indeed you, to any more of a summary than that, other than to say that we are now 16 minutes into this 24-minute penultimate episode. We eventually find our way to the therapist's office, where Velma finds a welder's mask like the one the killer wears, which gives us a cliffhanger, but without the satisfaction of an ending because the episode isn't actually over yet. Velma seemingly disappears after this scene. But because this show's specialty is anti-writing, it turns out that this was an anti-cliffhanger. We were led to believe that Velma had been disappeared by whoever appeared in the office. In other words, therapist's dad. He's the serial killer. But she hasn't, in fact. That was just a hilarious cut. And she just turns up at Not Shaggy's house the day after with a SWAT team and confronts therapist dad about the welder's mask she found. This is one of those comedic devices that doesn't really carry much comedy in on its own, but it can benefit from some comedic momentum. It's often the way with subversion. If the show in which the subversive device is deployed has already established its reputation as clever, funny, engaging, well-written, or whatever else, then the subversive device compounds the credit. It doesn't create the impression of any of the above, but it can maximize a pre-existing impression. It's something to use if you're already doing well. If, on the other hand, a show has already established itself as being terribly written, unfunny, not at all clever, trying too hard, and generally a mistake, the subversive device deployed for its own sake is simply irritating. This is what is known as the Rian Johnson effect. So while I see what the show was attempting to do here, and might otherwise have been inclined to praise it, the fact this show is so hateable just makes this subversion of expectations seem about as frivolous and nonsensical and generally pointless as everything else. Shaggy's dad actually had a welder's mask because he was welding Not Shaggy a sword for his birthday, so he's not the serial killer. Yay. What a spectacular waste of time. Daphne and Fred's popularity plan has worked, which, again because this is Velma, means the writers have somehow decided this is time to have a go at Chick-fil-A. Is that how you pronounce it, Americans? We don't have that in this country. Chick-fil-A? 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 Whatever. For some reason, the show decides to have a pop at it, with Fred's mum saying,
Daphne, as much as it shocks me to say this, Fred is right. People expect you to go together. And it's not forever, just until you're popular enough to do whatever you want. Like a homophobic chicken sandwich chain.
An entire universe of potential jokes with which to cap off this little sub-arc, and they decided to have a go at Chick-fil-A. That's a choice, because comedy, I guess. Fred's mum gives Daphne a job at their company. We don't have enough disparate plot threads on the go at the same time, so we learn that Fred's dad has overheard their plans, and he's now angry about that. Not Shaggy is annoyed at Velma for blaming his dad for the murders, so they're not friends anymore. More looking after baby stuff follows, more popularity stuff follows, Fred and Daphne kiss at the popular kids' party, Velma and the baby turn up, Velma gets upset, Velma's parents turn up, they learn the baby isn't hers, Velma's mum gets upset, she learns about the affair, which makes her miserable, the memory clock timer runs out, but she remembers everything anyway. She remembers that the serial killer is her. So again, that entire episode, harrowing waste of time, wasn't linked at all to the 72-hour device. The ticking clock ticked down to nothing. It wasn't even linked to her happiness or her unhappiness. But it would have been so easy to have her realize that it was tied to her true unhappy memories rather than to her happiness, to play it as though what she needed was to relive her bitterness, not some idyllic sham. At least then the reveal would have had some impact on everything we've learned about her since, the mechanic this episode was supposed to operate by. Not to worry though, I'm sure the show will find some incredibly satisfying way to resolve all of this. There is, theoretically, a universe where this anti-writing genre works, where disobeying all laws of plot and narrative in aid of comedy is actually worth it. But if you're gonna make these sacrifices in the name of comedy, and your show turns out not to have any comedy in it, then suffice it to say, you fucked up. The plot of Velma, such as it is really an excuse for a whole host of disconnected and barely connected skits to take place. I'm sure this has been done in sitcoms before, but I'm tired and I can't be bothered to look that up. But none of these skits is funny. Nobody is invested in Velma for its comedy, because it doesn't have any. It sacrificed its A-plot for something that doesn't exist. But hey, we've made it to the last episode, so let's save that little roundup for the end and get through this as quickly as we possibly can. We begin with Velma's mum being carted off to prison. Velma delivers the most meta of all its meta lines, which is so meta that it doesn't actually realize it is a meta joke.
And yet it got worse.
And it continues being unknowingly meta.
Because it made no sense. Huh? Nothing added up, and yet no one seemed to care. Yet it still got worse. And yet it somehow got even worse.
And to be honest, I could have just done that in lieu of this entire video, saving us all the time it's taken to go through the episodes. That pretty neatly sums up everything. So Velma's lost her friends, her mum's in prison, she's confessed to being a serial killer, and her self-professed motive is...
I did it because I wanted to put the brain of a popular girl into the head of my daughter, Velma.
What?
Okay, whatever. Velma still insists that none of this makes sense, even though actually, by the standards of this show, that actually makes an awful lot of sense. It's made all the popular kid jokes, it's made all the Velma's fugly and useless jokes, it's set up its own bitter and shallow internal morality, so this explanation would actually pay off all these things, and be completely in keeping with the show's overall approach. If this actually turns out to be her motive, the one that Velma says makes no sense, no, that actually is the only thing in the show that would make sense, so I'm sure we're gonna have some kind of twist coming up. Anyway, Velma insists that it makes no sense, so she's off to investigate. Meanwhile, Daphne is starting her internship with Fred's mum, who is evil. Her company got rich off of child labor or something. Fred has bought Velma's mum's Totally Not the Mystery Machine van at an auction and begun turning it into the Mystery Machine. But this occasion's, well, I mean, it's almost a Scooby-Doo reference, but it's also a pop culture reference, which means it has a hazy relationship with the thing it's referencing and is really just designed to belittle whatever target it has randomly chosen. The target in this case seemingly being the old Scooby-Doo cartoons themselves, because these writers hate anything remotely good. The convoluted setup is, Fred is angry that his mum doesn't think he's capable of running the company. He's painted a flower logo for the company, like the flowers on the side of the Mystery Machine, because, and I quote,
Wait, Fred, you bought this van? Why?
Because all cool fashion advertising for teens is just trashy, pedo-tinged sex stuff.
Actually, I think you'll find that's Balenciaga actually, but carry on, Fred. Fred thinks that if he drives the Totally Not Mystery Machine around, he can make gentlemen's accessories cool. Reasons, I guess, and prove he's not a joke, leading Velma to observe,
Because nothing's trashier or more pedo-tinged than teens in an old van. That's actually not a bad idea.
Now look, I'm not especially precious about Scooby-Doo. I'm more just annoyed that the show has once again embarked on this long and windy road toward a punchline that doesn't land because its reference makes no goddamn fucking sense. But if you are precious about Scooby-Doo, I would fully understand if you were now yelling, "Keep my dog's name out of your fucking mouth." See, show? See? That's a pop culture reference that actually kind of referenced pop culture. It's not hard to do it, show. Oh, good, and it continues to scrape the bottom of the barrel at the bottom of the world's deepest hole full of barrels. Velma decides to get herself arrested, but the cops say nah because her mum's in the cell, so they're too busy. But, Natch, she's brought Fred along to accuse her of bothering him, and this means she does get arrested. Why? Why? What could the show possibly be playing off of here? Might it, perchance, begin with white and end with people? Why, yes, I think it might. Now then, remember how, a few episodes ago, Daphne's real mum escaped her lesbo-cop mums in the Crystal Caves, but then got attacked by the serial killer, and so, presumably, was killed, but that it didn't really matter for the plot going forward because it served its only narrative purpose in giving Daphne clarity over her abandonment issues? Well, she's kind of back now, despite having been completely irrelevant to the plot since then because she's already served her only narrative purpose in giving Daphne clarity over her abandonment issues. Daphne finds a geode in her school locker containing a note from said absconding mother who apologizes for abandoning her and leaving her the pocket watch that she had found in the Crystal Cave. Meanwhile, Velma's mum reiterates to Velma that her motive was trying to put the brain of a popular girl in her head, but she says it repeatedly and in the same voice and with a weird expression, and so we learn that she never had amnesia. Instead, no, she was hypnotized. Her mum gets carried away by the police to be executed before Velma can break the hypnosis. The serial killer is still out there, but the pocket watch thing Daphne has will help them find whoever it is. But then, Velma hallucinates again because it turns out the stopwatch was used to hypnotize her on the day of her mother's disappearance to induce hallucinations and prevent her from finding her mother, and the watch is inscribed with the name of the evil general who created Project Scooby, who was also a master hypnotist, so they need to go show the watch to the brains to see if the brains remember anything about the watch, but Fred's been arrested for luring people into the Not Mystery Machine, so Daphne can't go, she has to go help Fred, while Velma meets the brains and the popular girls in the shower, so yay, we get another pervy shower scene again. So she explains her mom was innocent and shows them the watch, but none of the brains remember remember anything about it, but Gigi shouts at her for being mean to Not Shaggy, who's now leaving the school because she's a shit friend, but she won't engage with it because she's too busy to do it. Holy Buddha on a unicorn, the writing in this fucking show. Honestly, had it spent like 90% less time on unfunny skits and not saved all of its plot progression for 5 minutes of its final episode, you genuinely might have been able to craft a serviceable and maybe even funny murder mystery reimagining of Scooby-Doo out of all the raw material this show has had to work with. It's genuinely not empty of content. It's just that the writers evidently didn't give a shit about the content and have only included it now out of some vague sense of obligation. Velma finally gets around to listening to all the voicemails from Not Shaggy that she's been ignoring, which triggers some sad memory music and a montage, as she finally realizes how good he was to her and how terrible she was to him. Which is actually, yeah, it's a nice touch, excepting of course that we've already had this moment and it changed nothing. That's not a slight on this episode, that's a slight on the earlier episode, for wasting a legitimate device and denuding its proper use of whatever feelings it was banking on to have an effect. It's honestly as though none of the writers taking on these episodes watched the episodes that came before, or read the scripts around their episodes, or ever spoke to anyone else involved in writing for this show. But anyway, we don't get time to dwell on this almost realization on Velma's part, because the plot needs to move on again. And so, naturally, we get convenient information placement. Velma snaps away from the voice memos because she spots that her mother's glasses, which she's been wearing for the entire fucking show, were made by Fred's parents' company, the logo of which is the same as the logo on the pocket watch. So she picks up her dad and off they go to Fred's house. And once again, there is an entire scene of actual payoffs for actual character beats that doesn't suck because the show is actually letting itself be genuine for a change. It's clunky as hell and incredibly rushed and incredibly dense because it's all had to be crammed into this tiny fraction of the final episode. But we do actually get the conclusion of Velma's hallucinations arc, their link with her mother, with her father, with her need for affection from them, the reason for her enjoying Not Shaggy's affection, the effect that had on her hallucinations now being explained, not because she found it hilarious, which was the cruel and mean-spirited explanation from earlier in the show, but because they were genuine feelings. And look, this is all really nice. Why couldn't we have had more of this throughout the show? She even calls Not Shaggy as she goes down a well into the secret lab and apologizes and tells her that he'll always be her best friend. Unfortunately, though the show has discovered some sort of relationship with genuine feelings, it still hasn't figured out a relationship with comedy. So having fallen down the well, we get this.
Ugh, great. My phone's dead. Now I can't call back Norville or order Thai food.
Velma finds her way into the lab where Fred and Daphne have been kidnapped and tries to free them before the serial killer comes back. He comes back, but then he gets interrupted by bats for reasons. So they tie him up. Velma gives us a recap of the killings, etc., which I'm not going through because talking about the show once has been painful enough and I refuse to revisit it. They unmask the serial killer, and it turns out it's Fred's mum. Yay! She's the daughter of the evil general guy. Her plan was to replace Fred's brain with a smarter brain. We get more backstory, and this is Velma, so the backstory is that the mad scientist's experiment succeeded, but because the mad scientist was a diverse woman and the evil general was a white man, he tried to take all the credit from her, causing her to undo her experiments with the brains and brick up the lab. So he had her institutionalized, but he could never recreate her experiments. Fred's mum married Fred's father to stay rich. They built the company, but she hated her son and was threatened by Velma's mum's investigations, and so on and so on and so on. That explanation took a good few minutes, meaning we're now overdue a generic Velma joke, which Daphne Julie delivers.
Okay, but why pick the brain of a hot popular girl? We're literally the only murders people care about.
Against which suggestion, I advance George Floyd and run away very quickly. Fred's mum wanted a hot popular girl's brain combined with a man's body to recreate her own ruthless ambition or something. But then she tells us that she's realized the perfect brain for Fred's body is Velma's. So her hypnotized husband walks in and twats Velma in the head, and now everyone's been captured again. Velma raises a salient point. What's to stop her just going to the police once her brain is in Fred's head? But this is Velma, so the explanation is because white people.
Who more than you would truly appreciate the advantages of being a handsome, rich white man?
and because patriarchy.
Advantages? You think we like being president of the United States 97% of the time? That job sucks!
Having spent time with the brains, I was reminded that hot, popular girls your age don't yet realize just how much the deck is stacked against them.
And because rich guys.
I am so sick of rich guys like you, not only not realizing how much is handed to them, but still thinking they're the victims when they mess everything up because of their lazy entitlement and fragile egos.
This pisses off Fred, and he breaks out of the shackles and frees everyone, but his mum escapes. Fred tracks her down, but she tricks him into thinking she's been possessed by a ghost because stupid Fred.
Mother never could have wanted to swap my brain. She told me she's been possessed by the ghost of Dr. Edna Purdue.
I do love it when shows give us a greatest hits compilation of all their most tired, worn out, tedious material. This is a real treat. Not Shaggy turns up to rescue them. A stalactite falls on Fred's mum. Velma twerks over the bloodied corpse. The town loves Velma, but her friends still hate her. Her mum likes her, her dad doesn't. Shaggy takes up weed to get over the fact that he killed someone. Fred owns the Not Quite Mystery Machine. And that is it for season 1 of Velma. We fucking made it. It was a close run thing because, my god, I mean, that was so appalling it's practically its own genre, but we made it. I'm not going to go back over all the reasons for the show's awfulness. It's one-note not comedy, it's hypocritical feminism, its baffling approach to narrative writing, the fact it delighted in its vindictive cruelty against any demographic its writers liked to pretend are privileged, its approach to character writing that actually discourages investment in its characters, its pop culture references that don't reference pop culture, its smug self-satisfaction, its detestable protagonist, its nonsensical stakes, its mere existence, etc., etc., ad nauseum. Now, there's no need to go back over all of that. Instead, let's try something more difficult. Let's try to fix Velma.